Chapter 460. Hearing that Wang Ji did not allow him to fight, Mu Bin was confused. He asked, "Then what should we do?" "Do nothing, just wait and see. Unless the Duke of Loyalty wins with a few people, we can send troops if there is a chance. Otherwise, don't act rashly. No one is easy to provoke. As long as we don't help anyone, we will be everyone's friend. In this way, when the Jiaoji army is angry, they will not find trouble with us. They will only attack the king of Min. We will sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight to preserve our strength. No matter what, we will be in an invincible position." When these words were said, it was clear that Wang Ji was indeed planning for Mu Bin. Mu Bin kept nodding his head in agreement when he heard this. Speaking of which, his Mu family had been loyal for generations. This could be seen from history. However, the current situation was completely different from history because of the appearance of Yang Chundong. There were two emperors of the Great Ming dynasty. Both of them said that they were the legitimate ones. For a moment, Mu Bin did not know who to listen to. Under such circumstances, who should he be loyal to? Since he didn't even know what was going on, he might as well bide his time and observe the situation before making a move. Wang Ji saw that Mu Bin had stopped thinking about fighting, and could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. He was now relying on Mu Bin. Of course, he hoped that Mu Bin was as strong as possible. This meant that he would be safer. However, he did not know that this time, he was completely wrong. Everything was because he underestimated the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chundong. Perhaps Wang Ji's thinking was right. Among all the forces, Yang Chundong had less soldiers and no territory. He should be the easiest to bully. However, he forgot that if Yang Chundong was easy to bully, how could he save Zhu Qizhen from the battlefield? How was it possible for them to defeat the elite cavalry of Watts? How could he destroy the Huang bandit army that was getting more and more powerful in less than 2 months? How could he make Baiming substitute Grandmaster Zhu Qiyu and Southern Ming hero Zhu Qizhen afraid? How could someone who could do such a thing be a soft persimmon that would be easily manipulated by others? If one underestimated the enemy in the business world, it was very likely that one would be penniless. However, if one underestimated the enemy on the battlefield, it could cost one's life. Just like Yang Chundong's troops, after they left Gaozhou Prefecture, they passed Lianzhou Prefecture and Siming Prefecture. When everybody thought that he would detour around Zhen and Prefecture in the northwest and have a decisive battle with Ruan Gongwang's subordinates in Guangnan Prefecture, the mercenary army suddenly disappeared from everybody's sight. The mighty army of more than 10,000 people disappeared like evaporated water vapor. This news quickly spread to the South Ming Army, Min Army, Miao Army, Mu Family Army, and Jiaoji Army. Disappeared? How is this possible? Compared to the other military camps, Ruan Gongwang of Jiaoji Military Camp in Guangnan Prefecture was the most anxious one. In the past few days, he had already made preparations to fight the mercenaries outside the city. He even gave the order to not defend the city and go out to attack. Although abandoning the city and not defending it was equivalent to losing his advantage, he was still confident when he thought that his military strength was 7 to 8 times that of Yang Chundong's. However, he did not expect that after everything had been prepared, news suddenly came from the front. Yang Chundong and the mercenaries he had brought with him had disappeared. This made him feel that something was wrong. He hurriedly strode to the sand table and stared at the vicinity of Ximing Mansion. The news had been cut off here. Naturally, his gaze would also fall on this place. Standing aside with tiger-like eyes, it was Deputy General Hong Jin. Different from Deputy General Ruan Yongyang, he was the nephew of General Ruan Gongwang, and had a natural advantage. He could only rely on diligence and better performance to gain the general's approval. Just like before, when he led the troops to fight the South Ming Empire, he performed very well. More importantly, he was very obedient. That was how he got such a position. Although Hong Jin was very obedient, he also had his own ideas. Otherwise, he could not have reached the current height with only his honesty. Under his observation, he noticed that Ruan Gongwang's gaze fell on the vicinity of Ximing Mansion. His heart moved, and he said, "General, could it be that those people directly entered the dense forest and entered Liang Mountain?" Hong Jin's guess was exactly what Ruan Gongwang was thinking. These words made his breathing quicken. At this moment, another deputy general, who was also his nephew, Ruan Yongyang, fiercely stood up and said, "Impossible, they don't have the guts to enter Liang Mountain. Let's not talk about the problems of food and logistics for more than 10,000 people. Just the fact that it's already the 7th month, and the rainy season is coming at the right time. The weather is humid and hot, and even us locals aren't willing to stay in the mountains and forests at this time. Not to mention the snakes, ants, tigers and other creatures. Once we launch a pincer attack from the front and the right, I really don't see any way out." After saying this, Ruan Yongyang seemed to feel that it was not enough. He added, "Logically speaking, the loyal duke leading the troops should know this. If he doesn't even know this common sense, then I can only say that our opponents this time are too weak. They are not worthy of our attention." Ruan Yongyang's words were very reasonable. Jiaoji was located south of the northern border. It was hot and rainy, especially from May to October, when the rain would flood. At this time, the nests of many animals in the dense forest were not safe, causing them to roam everywhere. It was very dangerous. The reason why it was said to be very dangerous was that unless it was a particularly experienced local elder, not many people would be willing to enter the dense forest under such conditions. It was not much different from rushing through the gates of hell. Not to mention an army of more than 10,000 people. Once they entered without knowing anything, anything could happen. If they did not handle it well, it was normal to lose 60 to 70% of their non-combat personnel. In addition, without enough logistical support, no army would take the initiative to enter the mountain. It was precisely because of this harsh environment that Jiaoji was able to remain independent despite its small population and small army. Its overall strength was far inferior to the Great Ming Dynasty. Hearing Ruan Yongyang say so much in one breath, General Ruan Gengwang nodded repeatedly. Just when the other generals thought that he was thinking the same, he suddenly said to his deputy general Hong Jin, "Immediately arrange for scouts to enter the Langshan area and search for possible traces and evidence of their entry." The sudden decision stunned the other generals. After hearing this, Hong Jin's body instantly stiffened and he said, "Yes, General. This subordinate will do it immediately." After Hong Jin went out to arrange things, Ruan Yongyang, who was in the hall, said in a questioning tone, "Uncle, you don't really think that these mercenaries are brave enough to enter the forest, right? If that's the case, we don't even need to do anything. Most of them will die in there. Call me General. Also, I am the Commander-in-Chief here. I naturally know what to do," Ruan Gengwang reminded. Ruan Gengwang said in a warning tone. Ruan Yongyang's mouth, which had originally wanted to say something else, was now half open. Clearly his uncle was angry. When the main general was angry, even if you were his son, you would have to restrain yourself. This was the army. Without iron-like military discipline, there would be no way to win any battles. As for Hong Jin, he immediately sent out a team of 200 elite scouts to Langshan. Most of them had lived in the forest for generations, and many of them frequently went in and out of Langshan. Arranging for them to scout for information was the most appropriate thing to do. Go and return quickly. If you discover anything suspicious, report back immediately. This time, we don't need you to find out where the enemy is. As long as you can confirm that they have entered the Langsun region, it will be a great achievement." Hong Jin gave the order to the scouts. Following this, 200 horses galloped out and disappeared without a trace. Langshan. This forest had a long history. If one had to describe it, it could be described as a primeval forest. Especially now that it had not been developed and polluted, the number of mountains and forests and the density of the trees was unimaginable to ordinary people. For example, if one walked in this forest, regardless of whether it was day or night, unless one found a favorable position, it would be very difficult to see the sun. This was all because the density of the trees was too high. It was so high that it could completely block out the sun. Another example would be walking for tens of meters, at most 100 meters. In less than 10 meters, one could see thick tree trunks that were so thick that even two people couldn't wrap their arms around them. There were even thicker ones that were so thick that even 3 or 4 people's arms wouldn't be able to wrap around them. There were also many trees like this. From this, One could see how desolate and primeval this place was. When Yang Chendong led more than 12,000 mercenaries into this forest, he saw such a scene. Oh, the forest here is much denser than the ones we encountered during training. The trees are also much thicker. Not long after entering, Tiger's Mane's voice rang in Yang Chendong's ears. On the other side, Beta Persei also cooperated with him. Young master, the road here is muddy, and the temperature is so high. Not everyone can stay here. I finally understand your painstaking efforts a while ago. It was no wonder that Beta Persei would say this at this time. A while ago, Yang Chendong had not seen outsiders for a long time on the grounds that he was poisoned by an assassin. In fact, he had been secretly training the army. The main subject of the training was how to survive in the forest, and how to best exert one's strength. At that time, many mid-level officers, low-level officers, and even some higher-level officers did not understand this kind of training. Especially during training, Yang Chendong deliberately chose some rainy weather, and when the temperature was high to increase the intensity of the training. For this reason, many soldiers were injured. There were even some auxiliary soldiers who could not persevere at all, and were directly injured and retired from active service. Chapter 461. They hadn't even seen a single enemy, yet they were already losing members. This was because Yang Chendong's prestige was high enough. If it were anyone else, even the two most senior division commanders, Lung Song and Gao Xiong, wouldn't be able to hold the fort. At that time, people didn't understand, but now that they were in such an environment, everyone finally understood. They finally understood the painstaking efforts of the sixth young master, and they admired the vision of the sixth young master. Just like now, they were clearly in a very unfamiliar environment, and it was raining outside, and the weather was very humid. If it was the Southern Ming Army, not many people would be able to endure it, and losing people would be inevitable. However, in front of the Yang family army, it was nothing at all. Everyone just felt that they had returned to their previous training, and some of them were even more ambitious. They didn't treat this place as a battlefield at all, but as an ordinary training. It was because of this foundation that Yang Chendong dared to risk universal condemnation, and suddenly enter the Langshan area, making everyone who wanted to watch a show miss it. The Security Bureau was indeed a department with a lot of money. For example, the news that Ing Zong and Min Wang wanted to take advantage of the situation when the mercenaries and the Jiaoji army were both injured was already sent to Yang Chendong when he was on the road. In front of him was an opponent who was 7 to 8 times stronger than him, and there were 2 enemies who were waiting to ambush him. Anyone who encountered such a situation would be confused and feel helpless. In Yang Chendong's case, he just casually changed the route of the army. Or it could be said that he had only entered Liangshan according to the original plan. He had completely disrupted the military plans in the Yunnan region, causing the enemy to be at a loss of what to do. That's right, entering the Langshan area was one of the military steps that Yang Chendong had planned for a long time. In the territory of the Han people, especially under the watchful eyes of several parties, Yang Chendong felt like he was bare-chested for others to see. It was very uncomfortable, and he couldn't use his full strength to display his means. After all, his forces were the weakest at the moment. If his performance was too stunning, it would inevitably give all his enemies a sense of invincibility. Once they had such a feeling, who knew if they would join forces to attack him? If that was the case, wouldn't it be too dangerous? After all, he only had an army of about 10,000 people. As for how to conceal themselves, or rather, how to attract the attention of others, that was the most important problem. This was the reason why they decided to enter Langsun. Jiaoji was a foreign race, and history had proven that the people living here no longer viewed themselves as subordinates of the Han, regardless of whether they chose to submit to or rebel against the Han in the future due to the strength of the Han. On the contrary, they would be like an annoying poisonous snake, wanting to take a bite whenever they had the chance. Facing these non-humankind beings who had no standpoint, no principles, and no bottom line, Yang Chendong wouldn't try to persuade them with emotions and reason like the other emperors. Instead, he would directly devour them, destroy them, and achieve his goal of destroying the nation. That was to destroy the country. Speaking of which, it was quite scary. At least in the future, Without a strong reason, even the United States, which was the strongest in military, would not dare to do this. Even if they did, there would be a lot of trouble, and they would have no choice but to help one up and fight the other. It would be amazing if they could achieve the goal of being temporarily obedient. As for the Han, they didn't even think about it. Perhaps this had something to do with the Confucian doctrine of the mean, and the many years of inheritance. Even if they had the strength to destroy you, they wouldn't choose to do so. But what year was it now? It was 1451 AD. At this time, people were short-sighted, and they only cared about what they could see. They wouldn't even care about what was further away. This kind of environment where they only cared about their own family affairs was the best opportunity for Yang Qindong to achieve his goal. Putting everything else aside, Yang Qindong could wipe out a foreign race like the Jiaoji without worrying about the condemnation of other countries. In such an environment, if Yang Qindong was still bent on forcing them to submit, he would be pedantic and would truly be harming the country and the race. It was precisely because he had the intention to destroy the country that the trip to Mount Liang wasn't so abrupt. Once they entered Langsun, they could make use of the dense forest to reach the inner parts of Jiaoji. If they were able to move quickly, they might even be able to reach Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji. This was also the reason why the army had entered Langsun. He could hide himself, make others' plans to target him completely fail, and even achieve his ultimate military goal. With so many benefits, why wouldn't he do it? As for whether or not he would feel uncomfortable after entering the forest, did he really think that the targeted training was for nothing? The most annoying thing in the dense forest was nothing more than the rainy weather, and the poisonous insects that could appear everywhere. The former wasn't difficult to deal with. As mentioned earlier, the trees here were lush, and with so many leaves, the rain wouldn't easily fall on the warriors. At most, the path under their feet would be a little muddy. However, the latter was even less of a problem. Everyone had a pair of combat boots, and that solved all their problems. Not only did the path not seem so difficult to walk on, but with the combat boots, even snakes and insects wouldn't be able to do anything to them. For example, when marching in the wild, especially in a dense forest like this, one must pay attention to the cleanliness of the camp, and all trash must be buried in a timely manner. That was because as long as there was a bit of grease, there was a possibility of attracting ants, and ants would attract lizards, and lizards would attract snakes. When moving around in areas where snakes roamed, one must pay attention to reduce the possibility of being bitten by snakes. Generally, 70% of the bites would be on the feet. If one wore trousers, forest boots, and combat boots, even if one was bitten, one wouldn't be poisoned. Thinking about what people wore in the past, most of them were straw sandals and cloth shoes. Occasionally, some nobles would wear cloth boots, but in front of real combat boots, those were nothing. That was also the reason why the mercenaries dared to casually enter the forest while others viewed it as a dangerous place. As for whether there were poisonous snakes on the trees in the dense forest, when camping in the wild, some lime powder should be scattered around the area to prevent poisonous snakes from invading. Before sleeping, the bed should be checked, the tent should be pressed, and the shoes should be checked in the morning. If these were done, there would be no need to worry. And this knowledge was known by some local people, not to mention Yang Qindong, who came from the army in the future, was even more clear about these things. Long before they decided to enter Langsun, Resin City had already prepared enough combat boots, lime powder, and even some anti-mosquito medicine, as well as food like instant noodles and ham sausages. With sufficient preparations, food and clothing were no longer a problem. The next problem was how to kill the enemy. As for how to effectively kill the enemy, Yang Qindong had already made sufficient preparations and plans. Modern armies emphasized on fighting even when there was no war. This meant that even when there was no war, they had to make sufficient preparations to deal with it. What should they do when war came? Even when there was no war, they had to make preparations all the time, much less when war was about to break out. Yang Qindong had already summoned the 2 regiment commanders and the battalion commanders of the Cold Front to discuss the next battle plan. When they were in Gaozhou, they had already made the final decision. Faced with the Jiaoji army that greatly outnumbered them, they would adopt the plan of luring the enemy deep into their territory and nibbling away at them step by step to achieve their goal. The so-called luring the enemy deep into their territory referred to how to lure the enemy out of Lang's Sun, and then take a vicious bite out of them first. It was a rather daring plan. This was already the territory of the Jiaoji army. Luring the enemy out of their territory, and then dealing a heavy blow to them was probably something only Yang Qindong dared to do. Only the elites of the Cold Front could accomplish such a feat. If it was the Southern Ming army, they might not have the courage to make such a decision. Even if they could, they would not be able to accomplish it. However, this was not a problem for the Yang Jiejun. This time, after entering the Southern Ming territory, the mercenaries had won every battle. As long as they were willing, there was no enemy that could withstand a single blow from them. Under such an atmosphere, the morale of the army soared. The morale of the army could be used. In addition, after the previous battle with Miao Jun, Yang Qindong had completely given up on cold weapons and switched to firearms. Now even the auxiliary soldiers were equipped with Type 81 rifles. Even the temporary auxiliary soldiers were using crossbows that were swapped out from the auxiliary soldiers. This only boosted the morale of the army. It was not an exaggeration to say that with these weapons, it was equivalent to winning half of the battle. Just think about it, with the current weapons of the army, even if it was during the anti-Japanese era, they could easily turn the situation around. Not to mention the Ming dynasty from a few hundred years ago. There was even less chance of failure. It was because of this morale that the Yang family's army entered the Langsun region. They immediately began to make arrangements according to their previous plan. First, they chose a spacious battlefield and buried the enemy's bones there. Then they began to bury mines nearby. The construction of the first mine took the Red Nest City munitions factory a total of 9 months. This was because they already knew about gunpowder and the theory behind mines. However, mines were still too advanced at that time, so much so that it exceeded the imagination of humans at that time. But in any case, with enough scientific evidence and a real object as a reference, after 9 months, the first landmine was finally successfully produced after countless tests. With the first mine, the speed of production began to increase. This was originally not a difficult matter. As long as there was enough gunpowder and other materials, the mines were produced in batches and sent to the seaside of Lijiao Prefecture by the Yangtze Navy. They were sent to Yang Qindong's military camp. Chapter 462. This time, when they set off, each soldier carried a total of 3 landmines. This was because the landmines were still too large. Once the munitions factory in Crimson City made a breakthrough, the landmines would be reduced in size, allowing the soldiers to carry more. 3 per person. Even if some people wanted to take others, without mines, 10,000 soldiers would have at least 20,000 of them. What kind of power would they be able to unleash if that was the case? When they found a suitable ambush spot, Yang Qindong waved his hand and placed 10,000 landmines. Half of the total amount was enough to intimidate the Jiaoji army and give them a good start. The landmines were still being set up when the scouts from Lungfeng reported that they had discovered the Jiaoji army's scouts and asked if they should eliminate them on the spot. The scouts were all elites, and any one of them was more than enough to take on the previous squad leader of Cold Front. In addition, they were already equipped with silencers, night vision goggles, and other devices. They could really eliminate opponents from hundreds of meters away, without leaving a trace. It was no wonder they were so arrogant when they came to ask for instructions. Ignore them. Let the army find a place to set up camp and start cooking, Yang Qindong said nonchalantly. Not only did he have no intention of hiding, he even ordered his men to start a fire. This was an intentional exposure. Why did Yang Qindong suddenly enter the Langsun area? It was to give them time to plant the landmines. Since the work had already started, it would be completed soon. The next mission was to lure the enemy over. He could use the Jiaoji scouts to expose his location. Once the order was given, the originally quiet forest was suddenly filled with smoke and fire. This time, not to mention the elite scouts Hong Jin had sent, even ordinary people would know what was going on as long as they weren't blind. The mercenaries are indeed here. Quick, go back and report this to General Hong. The rest of you, keep a close eye on this area and find out where their base is located. The scout general excitedly ordered his subordinates, when he saw that there was a result of his investigation. Someone went back to report. The other scouts started to approach the central area carefully. They thought they were being very careful, but they didn't know that their every action, including eating, drinking, and defecating, were all seen by the scouts from Lungfeng. These scouts were either hiding in the dense trees or digging bunkers on the ground that were big enough for them to hide. Then they used binoculars and night vision goggles to observe the enemy's every move. They would then use hand signals to report to the nearby scouts. Yang Chendong had already given the order that once the scouts were discovered, they could fire back to protect themselves. As for whether or not this would alert the enemy, he was not worried at all. From Yang Chendong's point of view, if the enemy appeared in this area, it would be abnormal if they didn't react at all. That would attract the enemy's suspicion. However, it was precisely because of this order that the scouts of the Cold Vanguard began to have some ideas. Especially when they realized that the Cochin scouts could not detect their presence. Some of the warriors who were itching for a fight decided to reveal their whereabouts. Then 1 against 3, 1 against 4, or even 1 against 5, and retreated unscathed from time to time. In less than a day, they had killed close to 100 Jiaoji scouts, causing the enemy to lose half of their men. This not only frightened the scout general of the Jiaoji army, it also scared the platoon leader of the Lungfeng platoon. The 6th young master's intention was to lure these scouts to the side of the ambush. If they killed all of them, who would lure them into the ambush? For this reason, the platoon leader gave a military order. Unless they were discovered and their lives were in danger, no soldiers were allowed to expose themselves. Once they were discovered, they would be disqualified from Lungfeng according to the military rules. Once the war ended, they would be sent back to develop Qiqian City. Although developing Crimson City was also glorious, and the benefits were also very generous, how could it be more satisfying than fighting on the battlefield with real swords and spears? After the order was given, the scouts finally became obedient. Only then did the Jiaoji scouts continue to move deeper into the mercenary camp. Just when they thought that the enemy's morale was weak and couldn't pose a threat to them, they didn't know that they were only able to enter because the enemy went easy on them. There was nothing to write about the battle between the scouts and the Jiaoji scouts. At most, they only lost 100 men, which was nothing in the eyes of the mercenaries. Even the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers had killed far more enemies. Killing 100 men wasn't something to brag about. As for the Jiaoji scouts who were sent to deliver the message, they hurried back as fast as they could. By the time they arrived at Guangnan Prefecture, some of the horses had already died from exhaustion. The news that the mercenaries had indeed entered Lang Mountain and were discovered by the scouts was also delivered to Hong Jin. Hong Jin was very excited when he heard the news. He immediately went to see General Ruan Gengwang. Then he looked at the general eagerly, waiting for the order to attack. Humph. They really don't know what's good for them. However, they probably don't know that we discovered their intentions so quickly. Humph, since that's the case, it's a waste not to eat this fat meat that's delivered to our doorstep. Where's Wan Yongyang? Looking at the report Hong Jin sent over, Wan Gengwang's lips curled into a cold smile. Then he asked in a thunderous voice. Wan Yongyang, who was in his 20s, was also standing below. He was staring at his uncle's figure. He had made a mistake in his previous strategy and regretted it very much. Now he was most afraid that Ruan Gengwang would give the mission of exterminating the enemy to Hong Jin. If that was the case, then he would lose a great opportunity to perform meritorious deeds. Fortunately, his uncle was still his uncle. At the crucial moment, he didn't forget his family. When he heard Ruan Gengwang shouting his name, he quickly reacted and stepped forward. This general Ruan Yongyang listens to your orders. Ruan Yongyang. This general orders you to bring 30,000 soldiers. 20,000 of them are Jiaoji elites and 10,000 Han captives into Lang Mountain. Find the mercenaries and surround them to show the might of our Jiaoji army. When Ruan Gengwang finished speaking, Ruan Yongyang immediately cupped his fists and said, General, please rest assured. I will make the preparations now. Within a day, no. Within half a day, the army will be able to leave the city. At most, it will take 2 days to reach Lang Mountain. 5 days later, there will be good news. One could not blame Wan Yongyang for being so anxious. He was afraid that the mercenaries would continue to venture deeper into Langsun. If they were allowed to enter the inner region, even if they could be eliminated there, it would still alarm the emperor, wouldn't it? If that was the case, then this battle wouldn't be perfect. Hearing Wan Yongyang's confidence and the fact that he had already prepared everything, Wan Gungwang nodded in satisfaction. Good, go and make the arrangements. This general obeys. Wan Yongyang turned around and left with a face full of joy. Hong Jin, who had come to deliver the news, had a face full of envy. Of course, if he knew that Wan Yongyang wouldn't return this time, he wouldn't be envious. He would be glad that he wasn't General Wan Gungwang's family. Otherwise, he would be the unlucky one. Of course, this also proved that in the ancient army, relationships and family were very important. If you didn't have a strong relationship, no matter how outstanding you were, it would be difficult for you to make a name for yourself. In fact, this had always been the case since ancient times. In comparison, it was very difficult for the capable to rise above the mediocre in the cold front. One shouldn't think that everything would go smoothly once they joined the cold front. Ordinary members of the cold front would undergo periodic assessments. Once they found that their physical fitness couldn't keep up, they would be forced to leave the cold front. It was the same for the officers. It didn't matter if you were a platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander, or even a regiment commander or division commander. Once they found that you couldn't keep up with the development of the army, they would be removed. The only difference was that after you retired, you would be given a suitable arrangement. You could be assigned to the logistics of the army or be assigned to the development of the region. This way, even if you were to leave the cold front, you would still have a guarantee. This way, the officers and soldiers wouldn't have to worry. However, because of this kind of military discipline, the overall fitness of the cold front was constantly improving. Their physical fitness was always at its peak, which ensured that they were undefeatable and invincible. Wan Yongyang's order was sent out, and it was just as he had promised. The army quickly began to gather. The Jiaoji army, which was already prepared to fight the mercenaries, quickly gathered 30,000 soldiers and marched out of Zhen, and prefecture, heading straight for Langsun. The news quickly reached Yang Chendong's ears in Langsun. When he heard that the enemy had taken the bait, he couldn't help but chuckle. They're here so soon. Very good, very good. After saying very good twice, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. Beta Persei saw this and asked in confusion. Young master, why are you sighing? Beta Persei, why do you think the Jiaoji army sent 30,000 people this time? I've prepared 10,000 land mines for them. Isn't it a little overkill? Yang Chendong said with a look of pity. When Beta Persei heard this, he nodded seriously. Young master, you're right. Why don't we dig out more land mines? Let's not waste them. This. Yang Chendong despised Beta Persei in his heart. Young master, I was just sighing proudly. Why are you so serious? There's no need for that. Anyway, the military factory is rushing to produce more land mines. For the sake of the soldiers' safety, let's just waste some. Chapter 463. Sigh. Young master's words make sense. After hearing this, Beta Persei nodded his head heavily, as if this was how it should be. This was the charm of a leader. In the eyes of many people, especially those who had seen the development of Crimson City, Yang Chendong had already become a synonym for omnipotence. Under intentional rumors, many people even began to view him as a godlike figure. Since he was a god, it was normal for him to create things that people could not even imagine. Since he was a god, the things he said and the decisions he made were all correct. Since he was a god, how could Beta Persei oppose him? The two of them seemed to be talking about an extremely ordinary matter. However, if these words were heard by outsiders, especially by their current opponent, the Jiaoji army, many of them would probably vomit blood before even starting a fight. What, we sent out 30,000 soldiers, 3 times more than you, and you're complaining that we sent out too few soldiers. Even if you're looking down on us, you don't have to look down on us like this. Liang Mountain. This place, which seemed extremely bad to outsiders, at least this was what the Great Ming army thought, was currently bustling with noise and excitement. Following the sudden appearance of the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers, many of the surrounding birds and insects were scared away. Only the light rain continued to fall from the sky. To the Jiaoji soldiers who lived in this area all year round, this kind of weather was a common sight. It was precisely because of this that when the army arrived outside Liang Mountain, they only ate a hot meal before moving into the mountain. As the main commander, Ruan Yongyang was so anxious because he was afraid that the mercenaries would suddenly leave and disappear without a trace. If that was the case, it would be quite difficult to find the other party's tracks in the dense forest. Fortunately, the scout general had reported that the mercenaries did not leave. However, from the looks of it, they seemed to be packing up their tents and preparing to leave. We can't let them go. Hearing that the mercenaries were about to leave, Ruan Yongyang became anxious. Between a stationary army and a roaming army, which one was easier to attack, he couldn't be any more clear. Although it was easier to attack a roaming army, it was also easier to let the enemy escape. Once the enemy was in disarray, how could he capture them in this dense forest? Just defeating the mercenaries was no longer Ruan Yongyang's goal. This time, he wanted to completely annihilate his opponents, so that he could better show off his ability. In order to achieve this goal, he naturally couldn't allow the mercenaries to be active. Since he had decided to wipe out the mercenaries, it was better to act as quickly as possible. Just like that, the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had just eaten a hot meal sped towards the depths of Langshan district. They wanted to surround the mercenaries before they could react and catch them off guard. Ruan Yongyang's military order was passed down. All he did was say a few words, but the Jiaoji soldiers were the ones suffering. After leaving Guangnan Prefecture, they almost didn't stop for a rest. Instead, they had been traveling at full speed. They originally thought that they would have time to rest after reaching the outskirts of Langshan district. Who knew that another military order would be passed down, forcing the army to continue on their journey. With such speed, the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers could barely keep up. After all, the Jiaoji soldiers who were allowed to leave the country to fight were all specially selected to display the might of the Jiaoji army. However, the 10,000 Han captives were clearly inferior. Relying on the fact that the Ming dynasty was still in its heyday, these people's foundations were not bad. They were not so skinny that they looked like they were just skin and bones. However, it was impossible to say that their bodies were strong. Most of them were people with sallow faces and muscles. Especially after becoming Han captives, one could tell how much they were looked down upon just by hearing their name. Otherwise, why would they be called captives? The people who surrendered had no dignity. They always ate the worst, wore the worst, used the worst, and lived the worst. Take the straw sandals on their feet for example. They had been wearing them for who knows how long. The slightly better ones, or the ones that their wives made for them, had long been snatched away by the Jiaoji soldiers. In the end, they were given the ones that were about to break or were already broken. They could only continue to use them after some simple repairs. Then there were the weapons they used. Calling them weapons was a bit of an exaggeration. Most of them were broken and rusted farm tools. For example, iron rakes, hoes, and other such tools. Speaking of which, they couldn't be blamed. In the Great Ming Dynasty, steel was a forbidden item. The commoners were not allowed to own it. Once discovered, it would be a serious crime. In addition, their master, the Jiaoji, was terrifyingly poor. How could they be provided with any good weapons? Even the iron blades and spears of the real Jiaoji soldiers were relatively low in iron. At the very least, it was below average. The Han captives, who didn't have anything, now had to continue on their journey. Their morale had long wavered. If not for the fact that the Jiaoji soldiers were constantly patrolling and monitoring them, there would have been many deserters. Not to mention their equipment and morale. No one dared to disobey Ruan Yongyang's orders. They braced themselves and charged into the rainforest of Mount Liang. They followed the direction of the scouts and rushed towards the camp of the mercenaries. Compared to the Jiaoji and Han captives who rushed over, the mercenaries who had been here for close to 3 days were calm and unruffled. Many of them even had a good night's sleep. After entering Mount Liang, half of the first day was spent on the journey. The remaining day was spent on setting up camp and burying mines. When all these things were done, only 2 days had passed. The next half of the day was spent sleeping. After waking up, it was time to eat. After eating, it was time to go back to sleep. Using Yang Qindong's words, if one didn't have enough energy and stamina, how could one fight a war? For a time, the aroma of meat wafted through the camp. This way of eating their fill made all the Lung Feng soldiers, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers satisfied their cravings. Yang Qindong also said that this was the last hot meal before they found a new base. In the following days, they would have to eat cold food as much as possible. Even if they could start a fire, it was still a form of restraint. Therefore, if they wanted to eat, they had to hurry. Otherwise, who knew when they would be able to get another chance? Even though they said so, none of the soldiers were really going to eat to death. Not to mention that they were used to eating after entering the Yang family army. Even the temporary soldiers did not crave meat as much as before. Even if they could not start a fire to eat hot food, the meals of the mercenaries were still extremely good. For example, the staple food was instant noodles. Other than that, there were several types of chicken and pork sausages. Even the canned food that everyone brought with them tasted pretty good. There were canned pork knuckles, preserved vegetables with meat, for happiness meatballs, mushroom meat sauce, sweet and sour pork ribs, braised pork and so on. There were also luncheon meats and various canned fruits. It was really thirst-quenching and more importantly, it could keep them hungry. Such good food was something that many of the temporary soldiers did not even dare to think about in the past. Now they only treated it as ordinary military supplies. Many of them were surprised, but they kept these things well. Every time they woke up, the first thing they did was not to check where they put their weapons, but to check if the good food was still there, and whether it had been taken away by others. These people were really afraid of being poor. For people who were afraid of being poor, food was always the most important thing. At the last moment, they might not bring anything, but the food that could save their lives would always be there. Yang Qindong grasped the mentality of these people, and put food security as the first priority. He believed that as long as the soldiers had enough food, they would have the spirit to fight in the war. In order to live a good life without worrying about starvation in the future, how could they not fight with all their might on the battlefield? In addition to their advanced weapons and hard work during training, they were naturally successful on the battlefield. That's right, don't think that you are invincible with advanced weapons. Sufficient morale and fighting spirit, as well as transparent rewards and punishments, were the greatest motivators. Otherwise, how could the United States, which had such powerful weapons and equipment, lose the war on the Korean battlefield? This was the reason why the ideological work was not done well. With so much experience, Yang Qindong had originally received such professional training, and had been doing it for so many years. He only needed to move over, and use it to lay the foundation for his victory. Just like on the eve of the great battle, when the scouts at the front reported that the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers and 10,000 Han captive soldiers were rushing toward the camp, no one was afraid of the approaching battle, whether it was the cold front, the auxiliary soldiers, or the temporary auxiliary soldiers. The cold front soldiers were well trained and well equipped, so they naturally did not feel the slightest bit of fear. In addition, they knew that the sixth young master was fully prepared this time. Right now, they only needed to rest up and get up to wipe their hands after they had enough sleep. This way, their hearts would be calm and they would have the pearl of wisdom in their hands. This time, the auxiliary soldiers were all equipped with Type 81 assault rifles, which increased their confidence. They could not wait to have a chance to perform well. When they heard that the enemy was coming, not only were they not afraid, but they were also very excited. They were waiting for the enemy to arrive, so that they could perform well. The temporary auxiliary soldiers also wanted to perform well. They were also waiting for a chance to perform well. However, they had only been in the army for a short time, and they were using cold weapons like crossbows, so they were not very confident. Chapter 464. I say, Daniel, don't be so nervous. If you can kill one enemy on the battlefield, it's enough. If you kill two, you'll earn one. At most, you'll die once. After 18 years, you'll be a hero again. That's right. Daniel, little dog, As long as you follow the usual training method, you should be fine. Even if you die, there will be people who will remember us and send you off. That's called dying with dignity and dying with value. That's right. Haven't we already asked the squad leaders who know how to write our last words? If we really die, as long as our family members are still alive, no matter where they wander, they will have a chance to be found and taken care of. If that's the case, what's there to be afraid of? This was the scene when a few temporary auxiliary soldiers gathered together. Not far away, the leader of the 10-man squad, who was also the squad leader of the auxiliary soldiers, looked at what was happening. However, he didn't have the slightest intention to stop it. When one was really on the battlefield, there were some things that needed to be enlightened by others. However, most of the time, it was better to think it through by oneself. Since that was the case, it was better to watch them comfort each other and relieve each other's pressure. Sure enough, after being enlightened by the other brothers who called themselves comrades, Daniel and Xiaogo, who were originally a little nervous and even trembling, were no longer so scared. Their eyes also became brighter and brighter, and even brighter. Just like what the other comrades said, since they became soldiers, they would be on the battlefield and there would be life and death. If they thought it through, why should they be afraid of death? Not to mention that if something really happened to them, the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty had already promised them that he would try his best to find their family members, and then bring them to a very beautiful world where they could live happily. When they thought that whether they performed a meritorious service or died in battle, the outcome was not bad. They even had a chance to obtain a better reputation. So why not fight and take the risk? After being enlightened, the two of them became spirited. Unknowingly, the friendship between the soldiers in the same squad became deeper and deeper. This kind of thing didn't only happen in this squad. In the entire 14 battalions, at least half of the 5,600 temporary auxiliary soldiers had experienced this. Under the encouragement of the other comrades, their fear of war was resolved. Their fighting spirit began to condense and sublimate, turning into a strong morale that was waiting for the arrival of the war. The war was indeed about to begin. The 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers were the first to arrive, and the remaining 10,000 Han captives arrived 5 kilometers away from the mercenary camp 4 hours later. Order the entire army to surround them. First, form an effective encirclement. Then, take advantage of the fact that it's not dark yet, charge down. Ruan Yongyang, who had already surveyed the surrounding terrain, issued a military order to his Kiliarchs. General, the army is too tired from the journey. Why don't we have a good night's rest and fight again tomorrow? Out of sympathy for the soldiers, a Kiliarch spoke to Ruan Yongyang, whose eyes were shining. After Ruan Yongyang sneered, he said, "Haven't you heard that speed is crucial in war? Since even you think that our army should take a good rest, I presume that the enemy will also think the same. If we suddenly attack at this time, it will definitely be very effective. We will definitely be able to catch them off guard. Alright, do as I say. However, if anyone dares to question me, they will be punished according to military law." This battle was definitely a great opportunity for Ruan Yongyang to perform meritorious deeds, especially since the weather was still good today. The originally light rain had already stopped at noon. Without the obstruction of the rain, this was the best opportunity for the army to attack. If they could take down the mercenary army in one go, it would be a great achievement. However, if they were to rest, who knew what would happen? Since Ruan Yongyang had already made such arrangements, the Kiliarchs did not dare to question him. They immediately cupped their fists and went to prepare. The general had only given them an hour to prepare. During this time, they still needed to rush to their respective positions. It was truly too nerve-wracking. What? Someone said that the soldiers were hungry from the journey. Shouldn't they eat some hot food before fighting? Forget it. Once they are full, what if they don't want to move anymore? In any case, everyone had been given a certain amount of rations before they came. Although the rations should have dried up by now, with the rain that had just fallen from the roadside, they should still be able to swallow it. They would celebrate after they won the battle. Yes, when the army was marching to war, there were not so many rules. Especially in ancient times, not everyone could be equipped with something like a water bag. At the very least, one had to be a sergeant and above. When the soldiers were thirsty, they would just find a stream, or even a ditch by the roadside and drink it. Feel dirty? That's because you are not thirsty. Feel unhygienic? Sorry, the people of that time did not think so much. It was precisely because of these bad habits that the number of soldiers in the army was often very high. The combat strength of the army was also greatly weakened because of this. Fortunately, this kind of thing would not happen to the Yang Jiejun. The food they ate was both nutritious and safe, and the water they drank was both warm and cold. Even if the war lasted for too long, and the conditions were not good enough, the military regulations still required everyone to drink flowing water, or directly catch rainwater to drink. Drinking the stinky water in the ditch was absolutely forbidden. Because of this, there were soldiers who broke the rules, and were given a good beating in front of everyone. They were also beaten 5 times with the killing rod. Their skin was really lacerated, and their flesh was lacerated. The beatings were ruthless and the results were good. Very quickly, everyone remembered this matter, and no one broke it again. It had to be said that there were times when strict military regulations had its benefits. After all, some people liked this kind of thing. Furthermore, Ruan Yinyang had already given the order to end the battle quickly. In his opinion, he had 20,000 soldiers and suddenly appeared in a situation where they were surrounded. Facing 10,000 people, no matter what, victory was already in his hands. After all, in a war, the side that initiated the attack would more or less have the upper hand and hold the initiative. The Jiaoji army started to move. This scene was seen clearly by the scouts who were lying in ambush. These scouts were the most outstanding batch of people in the disguise test. As such, the hiding spots they found were very well hidden. For example, when Ruan Yinyang gave the order, there was a scout lying in ambush on a hill 100 meters away from them. The scout squad leader named Su Yunsheng was also a daring person. The reason he chose such a position was to observe the situation on the front line better. For this, he paid a price. For example, a few Jiaoji soldiers once poured urine on the spot where he was lying in ambush. When the hot liquid flowed down from the sky, Su Zhongxing did not close his eyes. Instead, he allowed the liquid to flow on his body. He endured it. It was this kind of perseverance that prepared him for the great merit he was about to perform. Ruan Yinyang didn't know about this. He only saw that victory was waving at him. Especially when the scouts came to report that the mercenary camp hadn't changed much and didn't seem to have noticed their arrival. This young General Ruan was even more convinced that he would win. Since he got the news from Guangnan Prefecture, he didn't take any rest at all. It only took him a bit more than 2 days to arrive here. The enemy probably did not expect such speed. Since they did not expect it, they should be prepared to pay a heavy price. Did Yang Qindong not expect it? Was he not prepared? With 10,000 landmines buried around the camp, what did he need to prepare? What was there to prevent? In order to allow the enemy to surround and attack from all sides, he chose to set up camp in a spacious area. It seemed to be well connected and was advantageous for a large army to fight. It was all to lure the Jiaoji soldiers into attacking with all their might. Otherwise, he could have found a place with steep terrain and stayed there. Wouldn't it be safer if he used ancient Mount Hua as a path? Speaking of which, the reason why Yang Qindong chose to set up the first battle in Jiaoji here and use defense as offense was to allow everyone to adapt. If the army was made up of only Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers, he would not have chosen such a battle strategy. Instead, he would have found a suitable place to initiate an attack. However, when the number of auxiliary soldiers was equal to the number of Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers, he had to be more conservative. As long as they won the first battle, everyone's morale would reach an unprecedented high. The following battles would be much easier. Because of this, they had to win the first battle. Fortunately, there were 10,000 landmines lying in wait outside. Yang Qindong did not need to get too excited. He only needed to get all the soldiers to prepare for a counterattack and wait for the landmines to go off. As Yang Qindong and the 12,000 soldiers waited, the first landmine finally went off. It was like a bolt from the blue, causing the originally quiet rainforest to become lively. The reason why it became lively was because after the first explosion, the sounds did not stop. They appeared one after another, to the extent that it did not take long for the entire earth to begin to tremble. There were 10,000 landmines. Even if each landmine only sent 2 people to the sky, none of the Jiaoji soldiers would be left alive. Just imagine how majestic it would be. Boom, 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 boom. The loud explosions continued. When Ruanyang, who was waiting for news, heard it, his face turned even uglier. The Jiaoji army was not completely useless. At the very least, they had heard about the strength of the mercenaries. Therefore, they knew about the incident where 20,000 Miao soldiers were ambushed and blown up in Gaozhou. Therefore, when they launched the attack this time, Ruanyang had made some preparations. For example, the formation of the army was to spread out. For example, he wanted the Han captives to charge at the front. Chapter 465. This was to prevent his side from suffering too heavy of a loss before the battle even began. However, even though he was somewhat prepared, his expression was still very dark when he heard the incessant rumbling. His expression had completely darkened, and even the Chiliarch who was about to ask if he should withdraw the army didn't dare to raise any objections. Even Ruanyang, who was 5 kilometers away, was frightened by the might of the landmines, much less the Jiaoji army at the front lines. The Han captives who were arranged to be at the front lines were unhappy. They knew that they were being used as shields. However, they had no choice but to lower their heads and endure. They thought that if they could make use of this opportunity to be the first to charge into the camp and kill the enemy, they would be able to gain merit. With such a helpless mentality, the 10,000 Han captives started to advance in all directions. However, when the landmines exploded one after another under their feet, everyone's expression changed. They had never seen such a thing before, and had never seen such a large commotion. Many of them instinctively fell to the ground, and even threw away the hose in their hands that could not be considered weapons. Bastards, get up and continue to charge. The Jiaoji soldiers at the back were also frightened by such a commotion. Fortunately, these godly objects that could cause people to fly were only dangerous when they were close to them. They could only be triggered when they stepped on them. After a while, they calmed down. Then, they began to force the Han captives who were afraid of death to charge forward. They were kicked up from the ground one by one. If anyone was unwilling, the Jiaoji soldiers would immediately swing their blades and send their heads flying into the air. Seeing blood, the other Han captives did not dare to resist. They could only grit their teeth and continue forward. They prayed that their luck would not be so bad that they would not step on those godly objects that could take their lives. However, such praying was destined to be useless. For an entire 2 kilometers, there were landmines that could cause people to fly everywhere. Even if you were lucky and did not step on one, there was no guarantee that your luck would be the same the next time. However, because the Han captives slowed down and became more careful, the explosions of the landmines were not as concentrated. However, from time to time, someone would still be hit. Not only him, but others would also be blasted into the air. Just like that, they walked and stopped for an hour. After paying the price of 6,000 to 7,000 people, they had completely stepped on the mines in a few areas, turning them into a battlefield vacuum that could be entered and exited. Scouts reporting that all the mines in Area 3 have been cleared. All mines in Area 5 have been cleared. District No. 6. Standing in the temporary military tent, Yang Qindong listened to the report while watching Tiger's Mane insert small red flags into the sand table in front of him. Good. Pass down the order. In a quarter of an hour, we will launch a full counterattack along the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 8th areas. Blow the bugle of charge. After Tiger's Mane inserted the flags into the sand table, he turned around and asked Yang Qindong, "Young master, do you want to take captives?" Following this question, the atmosphere in the tent became tense. When it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, Yang Qindong's voice sounded. "No need. Apart from leaving Ruanyang's dog life as planned and baiting Ruangengwang to bring reinforcements, everyone else can be killed." When these words were spoken, Luo Pe, Lu Zhuo, Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, Kong Chuanqin, and the other officers' expressions changed. They were very clear that under this order, those 10,000 people, no. Even if there were no more than 10,000 Han captives, they would all die. Carry it out. Some people's spines have already been broken. I'm afraid it will be difficult for such people to stand up again. Instead of this, it's better to give them a quick death, and hope that they can be reincarnated into a good body in the next life. Yang Chendong felt the solemn atmosphere in the military tent, and knew what everyone was thinking. However, he did not have any intention of changing his mind. He only gave a simple explanation. These Han captives were indeed scared. Even if they had weapons in their hands, they did not dare to resist the Jiaoji army. Especially when they were 1-to-1 in terms of military strength, they did not dare to resist. These Han people had already lost their dignity. It was not a pity to lose them. Furthermore, in this rainforest, Yang Chendong did not have much food to satisfy them. He also did not have the time to reorganize them. Since that was the case, why not give them a quick death? Yang Chendong gave the order, and gave an explanation. All the officers of the battalion level and above silently nodded their heads. None of them would say that the 6th young master was cold-blooded. War was a matter of life and death. Being merciful to the enemy was being cruel to oneself. This was a saying that they had heard countless times. They could understand. With Commander Luo Pu as the leader, all the officers saluted with a solemn expression before quickly exiting the tent. Very quickly, outside the tent, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The mercenaries were finally going to show their might and counterattack. The mercenaries were preparing for their counterattack. The approaching Jiaoji soldiers were still excited about the fact that there were no more landmines in front of them. In their eyes, the mercenaries only had a few tricks up their sleeves. Just like when Miao Jun ambushed the mercenaries, wasn't he also heavily injured by the bombs before clashing with his cold weapons? Although the landmines had injured close to 7,000 of their men. And even if General Ruan Yongyang still had 1,000 men protecting him, in terms of military strength, they were about the same as the mercenaries. There wasn't much of a difference, and they still had the qualifications to fight. Of course, the main reason why these Jiaoji soldiers felt so good about themselves was that most of the landmines had killed the Han captives. The real Jiaoji soldiers did not suffer any heavy injuries. These elite soldiers from Jiaoji believed that it was time for them to display their strength. In the face of cold weapons, they were not afraid of anyone. It was because of this arrogance that the Jiaoji soldiers began to charge with the remaining Han captives. Seeing that the mercenaries' camp was less than 3 li away from them, and that there were no obstacles in front of the enemy camp, this was the best time to charge. Immediately, they began to run. As they ran, a series of rumbling sounds could be heard. Their momentum was quite shocking. In ancient times, when 2 armies fought, whichever side charged first would have the upper hand. For example, in terms of morale, might, etc. As the side that charged last, they would be at a disadvantage. Perhaps before you even charged, the enemy would have already charged over. Using the advantage of running, it was very easy to break through the enemy camp. Therefore, there was a saying that once the distance between the 2 sides was 2 miles, if the other side did not launch an attack, there would be no chance for the other side to charge. What awaited them was only the destruction of the camp, which would lead to failure. It was because of this mindset that when the Jiaoji soldiers were 2 li away and saw the cold vanguard soldiers in camouflage uniforms walk out of the camp, there was no fear in their eyes. On the contrary, there was shock. Shock because they were about to win. Shock because their charge had already been formed, and the enemy had not made any preparations. Facing such a charge, the cold vanguard soldiers walked out of the camp when they were 2 li away. They either stood or squatted down with a wooden expression as they raised the 95 style in their hands. In the eyes of the real cold vanguard soldiers, they were invincible. Anyone who dared to provoke them and offend them had to die. As for the rules of the battlefield, it did not matter who charged first or who had more soldiers. It did not affect their mentality. All auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers, get ready. Once the cold vanguard soldiers start firing, we will charge out. Remember, don't leave any survivors, don't take any prisoners. Just charge out in a straight line. Regiment Commander Luge's voice rang out at this moment. It's time to perform meritorious deeds. Everyone get ready. Regiment Political Commissar Song Jia also shouted loudly. It felt as if he did not shout, he would not have the chance to do so. A regiment commander and a regiment political commissar gave the order at the same time. 5,000 auxiliary soldiers and 5,600 temporary auxiliary soldiers, a total of 26 battalions and 2 companies of soldiers, were ready to charge. Some soldiers had even started to adjust their breathing in hopes that they would be able to run to the front in the next charge and perform more meritorious deeds. Auxiliary soldiers wanted to become cold vanguard soldiers through meritorious deeds. Temporary auxiliary soldiers wanted to become auxiliary soldiers through meritorious deeds. This was the goal of most soldiers. Just like what the Duke of Loyalty said, a soldier who did not want to become a general was not a good soldier. Since other people could do it, why couldn't they do it? Under this kind of competition, a war was about to break out. The auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers in the military camp were fully prepared. They were waiting for the gunshot to start a full-scale counterattack, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. The 1,500 cold vanguard soldiers at the front did not open fire immediately. They were looking for the best formation to ensure that no matter which direction the enemy came from, there would be enough bullets to feed them. 1,000 meters, 900 meters, 800 meters. When they reached 800 meters, they were already within the shooting range of the 9.5. However, as the commander of this battle, Luo Pastil did not give the order to open fire. He was still waiting for the best shooting range. 700 meters, 600 meters, 500 meters. As the shot was fired, Luo Po's shout finally spread throughout the entire military camp. Fire! Guns! Guns! Chapter 466. Following the gunshots, the charging Jiaoji soldiers fell to the ground one after another. The cold vanguard soldiers followed their own formation and found their targets. Although there were some overlaps, the effect was already very good. Once they discovered that an enemy was still running, the sharpshooters of the cold vanguard soldiers would immediately finish them off. One row was prone, one row was half-squatting, and one row was standing with their guns in their hands. Under the overlapping attacks of these 3 rows, a single cold front platoon was able to form a formation that could wipe out all the enemies in front of it, leaving no one alive. All sorts of miserable cries rang out. Along with the continuous deaths of the charging Jiaoji soldiers, the originally dense charging momentum was quickly suppressed. People say that when there are 10,000 soldiers, there is no end to them. However, when they fell to the ground in rows, the feeling was equally shocking. It was like a domino effect, instantly causing the formation of the Jiaoji army to fall into chaos. Hold on. A few lucky kiliarchs of the Jiaoji army were still shouting loudly, trying to stop the situation from deteriorating. Some of the kiliarchs were smart enough to shout, "The enemy has a limited number of muskets and a limited range. We don't have to be afraid. As long as we wear them down, the final victory will be ours." Their shouts were still echoing in the rainforest, but following that, countless battle cries came from the opposite camp. Then, when countless auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers rushed towards them, their defeat was set. Commander Lujua, who couldn't wait any longer, gave the order to charge as soon as he heard the gunshots. Then he waited for the cold vanguard soldiers to fire 3 times, killing or injuring at least 3,000 to 4,000 Jiaoji soldiers. Then the cold vanguard soldiers charged forward with the momentum of Mount Tai. The reason why they charged forward was because there were more mines that had yet to be triggered. If the charging formation was too scattered, it would be easy for them to get injured. Fortunately, the Jiaoji soldiers' formation was already very scattered. In addition, they were originally in a large encirclement. This created enough space for the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers to counterattack. They didn't have to worry about trampling each other during the charging. The mercenaries charged out of the camp and charged forward. Facing this sudden change, the Jiaoji soldiers didn't retreat immediately. Instead, they held their weapons and stood still. They wanted to wait for the enemy to charge over before engaging in a bloody battle to make up for the losses they had suffered. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. When the Jiaoji army retreated into a tight formation, the auxiliary soldiers who were 400 meters in front of them opened fire. The Type 81 automatic rifle was changed to a continuous firing mode. Then two. Gunshots were heard continuously. The Jiaoji soldiers who were still waiting for their cold weapons to engage in close combat had never seen such a situation before. Just the first wave of gunshots had caused thousands of people to fall on the ground. This sudden change caused the morale of the Jiaoji soldiers who were still holding on to their last breath to lose their morale. The most important thing for an army was morale. With morale, they could fight one against two or even more people. Once morale was gone, a few people wouldn't dare to fight against one opponent. Now it was the latter situation. First, the mines were sent up into the sky. Then the Type 95 long-range attacks were launched. Finally, the Type 81 guns were used to kill at close range. After 3 consecutive attacks, the Jiaoji soldiers' last bit of spirit and morale were completely destroyed. Forget about those who had fallen to the ground. Those who were still standing were considered lucky. However, at this moment, all they wanted to do was turn around and run for their lives. What kind of joke was this? They hadn't even engaged in close combat. They didn't even get a clear look at the enemy's appearance. Out of 19,000 people, less than 5,000 were left. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Once a third of an army was severely damaged, it was possible for the army to explode. This was an accepted rule on ancient battlefields. The reason why the Jiaoji soldiers were able to hold on until now was because they had always been fantasizing about close combat. They wanted to achieve victory and turn the tables around. However, when they realized that their last hope was dashed, and they had no chance of getting close to the enemy, what were they waiting for if they didn't run and explode? The 5,000-strong army retreated rapidly in different directions. They wished that their parents had given them an extra pair of legs. Behind them, more than 10,000 auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers were charging at full speed. Occasionally, someone would stop and fire a few shots, shooting down the Jiaoji soldiers who were running at the back. Charge! Temporary auxiliary soldiers. Our crossbows have a limited range. If you want to contribute, you have to run fast. Charge! A few temporary auxiliary battalion commanders shouted loudly at this moment. Then, they looked at some of their auxiliary battalion comrades who were holding Type 81 rifles with resentment in their eyes. They couldn't be blamed for looking at them like that. If they contributed, what about the temporary auxiliary soldiers? Amidst their shouts, the temporary auxiliary soldiers started to increase their speed. Daniel and Xiaogo were also running as fast as they could. Originally, they thought that in terms of military strength, this would be an evenly matched battle, and many of their temporary auxiliary soldiers would die. After all, their weapons and intimacy were far inferior to Lung Feng's auxiliary soldiers. On the battlefield, there was a need to differentiate between the legitimate and the illegitimate. It was just like a family. When there were many children, there would always be some who would be liked. It was reasonable for Daniel and Xiaogo to have such thoughts. This was also what they were worried about. However, when the battle really started, they realized that they weren't the ones to attack first. Instead, it was Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers. All they had to do was take advantage of the situation and kill the enemy. Under such a situation, if they still couldn't kill the person who defeated the enemy, then they would have lived in vain. They would have eaten so much meat and suffered so much training for nothing. Humans were like that. Before something was done, they would always worry about this and doubt that. However, when they really did it and saw hope, then it was time for them to give it their all. Just like now, all the temporary auxiliary soldiers started to exert their strength. They even thought about earning more merits and getting better treatment. With such thoughts, they completely forgot about their fatigue. They all stimulated their potential and ran forward without any fatigue. In comparison, the Jiaoji army was in a much worse situation. After 3 battles, there weren't many real Han captives left. Most of them were real Jiaoji soldiers, and they were the elites of Jiaoji. However, these elites had been constantly on the move for more than 2 days. Their physical strength was already exhausted. Now that they were frightened by the battle, many of them started to feel weak in their legs. They couldn't display their usual speed. One was exceeding their normal speed, while the other was not being able to use their full strength. The outcome of the battle was obvious. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the temporary auxiliary soldiers had already run behind the Jiaoji army. Then, they fired their crossbows and arrows at the back of the Jiaoji army, causing them to scream in pain. Auxiliary soldiers protect from the sides. Prevent any accidents from happening. Seeing how brave the temporary auxiliary soldiers were, the regiment commander Lu Zhua gave a military order to the soldiers beside him. Using this battle to raise the morale of the temporary auxiliary soldiers was also the request of the 6th young master. Of course, they had to do their best to fulfill it. Reality also proved that after this battle, the 14 battalions of temporary auxiliary soldiers should be real soldiers. Under the combination of the Type 81 assault rifles and crossbows, the Jiaoji army had no chance of survival. The only thing they could do was to die sooner or later. Lost, the front line has lost. Less than 5 li away, a Chiliarch stumbled over with a face full of panic. Pooh! Just as Ruan Yinyang was about to walk forward and ask for an explanation, he suddenly felt a pain in his right leg, following which, he fell to the ground with a plop. This sudden scene caused the surrounding Jiaoji army to turn pale with fright. They couldn't understand what had happened. They couldn't understand why their general Ruan would fall to the ground. However, there was only a slight movement from a mound of dirt about 100 meters away. Of course, even if there was movement, it wouldn't attract any attention. Unless someone was keeping a close eye on the mound, such a slight movement wouldn't be noticed. Needless to say, this movement was from Su Yunsheng, who was hiding there. He had already found the best shooting position. With the help of the silencer, his movement didn't attract any attention. It was as if he had never moved. After firing that shot, he went back into silence. Ah! It hurts, it hurts. Ruan Yinyang, who had suddenly fallen to the ground, screamed hysterically. That shot had broken the small bone in his right leg. Because the distance was too close, the shot had even pierced through the bone and flew out. His calf bone had been pierced, so it was no wonder that Ruan Yongyang would scream like this. Because of this, the army that should have retreated after hearing that the front line had lost the best opportunity to break through. Ruan Yinyang half knelt on the ground, cold sweat dripping down his face. Beside him, a few medical personnel were busy. However, in the face of a broken leg, there was nothing they could do even if they had good medical skills. This won't do. General needs to rest. He can't run around anymore. Otherwise, the consequences will be dire. A medical officer said with a serious expression. Chapter 467. I agree. The other 2 military doctors couldn't help but nod their heads. It was obvious that this was exactly what they wanted to say. Even if the front line was defeated, the 3 military doctors still had the same attitude. Speaking of which, this was something that could not be helped. Who was Ruan Yongyang? He was a member of the Ruan clan, and the nephew of the frontline commander, Ruan Gengwang. If he lost his right leg because of this, it was equivalent to the 3 of them losing their heads. For the sake of their own lives, they would never agree to leave this place right now. The 3 military doctors had their own ideas, which gave the Chiliarch a headache. He knew that retreating now was the best way. Perhaps they could preserve the strength of 1,000 men, but sacrificing one of Ruan Yongyang's legs would not end well even if they escaped with their men. Since that was the case, it was better to stay and defend with all their strength. If the reinforcements could arrive in time, they might be able to survive. Organize the defense immediately. At the same time, send someone to Guangnan Prefecture to ask for reinforcements. It must be fast. The Chiliarch was a decisive person. After making the decision, he began to arrange the following matters. Then, the 1,000 men began to move to a slightly higher place that they had chosen long ago. Obviously, they wanted to use the terrain to strengthen their defense. The 1,000-man team quickly left the place. Only when everything quieted down did the mound 100 meters away move slightly. Then Su Yunsheng, who was covered in leaves and dust, suddenly stood up from the mound. Phew! First, he exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then he shook his body hard to shake off the dust that stuck to his body for camouflage. Then he determined the direction and rushed to the camp of the main force. There was a whole platoon of scouts lying in ambush nearby. What they needed to do was to shoot Huan Yongyang at the critical moment. They did not want to kill him, but only to make it inconvenient for him to move. If this task was given to others, it would naturally be difficult to accomplish. It could even be called an impossible task. As the general of the front line, how could Huan Yongyang have too few guards around him? However, it was a different matter in the eyes of the mercenaries who had long-range weapons. At least in the eyes of the elite scouts, all they lacked was an opportunity. Once the ambush location was closest to Huan Yongyang, that person could replace a platoon of soldiers to complete this seemingly impossible mission. Unfortunately, Su Yunsheng, who was already a squad leader, had good luck. The place where he was lying in ambush happened to be Huan Yongyang's temporary resting place. Thus, the shot was fired and completed the sixth young master's orders. Su Yunsheng was somewhat excited as he rushed towards the mercenary camp. Of course, he wasn't going there to show off his achievements. Instead, he needed to tell the sixth young master what he had just heard and seen, so that he could make the best decision. Outside the Yang family army's camp, the frequency of gunshots was getting lower and lower. From the start of the battle, when the Jiaoji army started charging and stepped on the first landmine, it had been 6 hours since the start of the battle. When the battle started, it was afternoon and they could be seen everywhere. Now that it was night time, the moon hung high in the sky and the sky was getting darker and darker. After 3 hours of intense battle, the overall situation was settled. From time to time, there would be battle reports from the front lines. The strategists in the tent were still doing all sorts of calculations. The approximate number of casualties had been calculated. Of the 19,000 enemies, about 7,000 had died from the mines, 3,000 had died in the first frontal assault, and another 5,000 had been killed by the subsequent attacks. Now there were less than 4,000 people still running away. However, even these 4,000 people wouldn't have a good ending. There was an 80% chance that they would be caught and killed by the cold vanguard, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers that were scattered out. Only about 10%, or at most 20%, of the enemies were lucky enough to survive. However, whether or not they were able to withstand the harsh weather of the rainforest and resist the invasion of the poisonous insects and live a healthy life, only the heavens would know. Report: Scout Platoon Squad Leader Su Yunsheng requests an audience. The voice of the first guard, Ba Daojiang, rang out from outside the tent. Su Yunsheng. Hearing this name, Yang Chendong quickly outlined the figure of a tall young man in his mind. He saw the potential of the other party as a scout during the assessment, and discovered him. Since he was someone that Yang Chendong thought highly of, how could he not have an impression of him? Let him in. As the voice fell, the tent's curtains were pulled open from the outside. Su Yunsheng, his face covered in dust and his body wrapped in leaves, strode in. "Hello, sixth young master," Su Yunsheng said excitedly with a very standard military salute. "You've worked hard. Come. Quickly give Yunsheng a bowl of water to drink." Although Su Yunsheng's mental state was very good, Yang Chendong could still see that his body was a little tired. Yang Chendong, who started as a scout, was very clear about the hardships in the rainforest. A bottle of canned fruit was poured into a big bowl. Hu Meng personally delivered it to Su Yunsheng. Then Su Yunsheng opened his big mouth and revealed an honest smile. Then he gulped down the big bowl of canned fruit. He was indeed a man. Even the fruit in the soup was finished in one gulp without the slightest pause. This scene caused Hu Meng and Yang Er, who were watching from the side, to laugh mischievously. Perhaps he felt that his posture of drinking the canned fruit was a little too strong. Su Yunsheng also scratched his head and laughed. Seeing that Su Yunsheng was more energetic after drinking a bowl of canned fruit, Yang Chendong asked with a smile, "How is it? Do you have any good news to tell me?" "Yes, sixth young master. My luck is good. The enemy General Huan Yongyang is only 100 meters away from me. I shot him in the right calf, and the bullet penetrated. Now they have retreated to a high hill 2 miles away, and are in a defensive position. They can't escape." Su Yunsheng was indeed worthy of being promoted to the position of deputy platoon leader. The military report was very detailed and decisive. Good. Yang Chendong listened to these reports and happily raised his arm, then slammed it down. As long as Ruan Yongyang can't escape, then the next thing will be easy. Not bad, squad leader Su Yinsheng. You have done a great job this time, and after the battle is over, you will be rewarded. Yes. Su Yinsheng's eyes also flashed with light. First he straightened his body and agreed. Then he smiled as if they were familiar with each other. Sixth young master, do you want us to sneak up and kill them a few times while it's dark? With the existence of night vision equipment, plus the fact that they usually train at night, it was not difficult for them to kill in the dark. It was even one of their best skills. However, in the face of Su Yunxing's request, Yang Chendong did not immediately agree. Instead, he shook his head and said, "No need, they are already frightened now. If we scare them too much, it will be easy for them to turn around and run. If that's the case, then it won't be fun. Besides, every scout has a treasure. It's better not to take risks." Hearing that Yang Chendong was so concerned about the safety of his brothers, Su Yunxing's eyes were filled with gratitude. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your concern, but we are not afraid of hardships or dangers. Good, your fighting spirit is commendable, but we really don't need you now. How about this? Go back and inform your platoon leaders and comrades to take turns watching Ruan Yongyang and the others tonight. Take turns to rest well, and keep an eye on the movements outside Liang Mountain. Once you discover the Jiaoji army coming, report to me immediately." Yang Chendong was not thinking about how to deal with Ruan Yongyang. Since the other party had already decided to stay behind, it was like a piece of juicy meat in his mouth. He could eat it whenever he wanted. Right now, he was more concerned about how to take down the army of Jiaoji. After all, compared to the appetizer in front of him, that was the real feast. Su Yunxing accepted the order and left. Yang Chendong was still unable to rest in the military tent. He still needed to listen to the reports from all sides to make the most accurate judgment and various arrangements for the upcoming battle. Fortunately, everyone had enough time to rest. Staying up all night like this was not a problem at all. Guangnan Prefecture. On the morning of the third day after the battle, news of the battle at Liang Mountain reached their ears. In the largest residence in the prefecture, where General Ruan Gungwang rested, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard early in the morning. "Idiot, idiot!" Ruan Gungwang's hysterical shouts were accompanied by his heavy breathing. It was obvious that he had been angered by the battle report. 20,000 against 10,000. Not only were they defeated, but they were also severely injured in a single night. Their strength was reduced to less than a tenth of their original strength. This result was completely out of everyone's expectations. In Ruan Gungwang's view, even if the mercenaries had some tricks up their sleeves, they should not have much room to display in the rainforest. It was already amazing that they could fight his nephew Ruan Yongyang to a stalemate where both sides were injured. At that time, he only needed to send in 10,000 or 20,000 soldiers to achieve victory. Who would have thought that he would be defeated so quickly? Moreover, he would be defeated so easily and thoroughly? "General, young General Ruan is in a critical situation. I would like to request for battle." Hong Jin had also seen the battle report. However, they were not sad at all. On the contrary, they were gloating. He should have been the one leading the troops. Now that someone else had taken the lead, it made him feel very uncomfortable. Now that the one who wanted to take the credit had failed, wasn't it time for him to show his skills? Hong Jin took the initiative to request for battle. Ruan Gungwang raised his eyebrows. "All right, I will allow it. However, you must act quickly. Saving Yongyang is a great merit. Then, I will personally lead the army to support you. No matter what, this mercenary army must be eliminated to vent my hatred." Chapter 468. Ruan Gungwang was indeed very angry. His journey out of Jiaoji had been very smooth. Now, an army of more than 10,000 people dared to provoke him, and even won the first battle. If he did not teach them a lesson, who knew how many people would laugh at him? This was something he could not tolerate. "Yes." Hong Jin replied excitedly. He knew that it was time for him to shine. There were 6 major surnames in Jiaoji. They were Ruan, Chun Li Fan, Huang and Pan. Even though there were a few people with the surname Hong, they weren't very famous. As the descendants of the Han clan, they were instilled with the idea of how to raise their clan's status in Jiaoji and enter the ranks of the 6 great clans. Hong Jin was instilled with this idea since he was young. This was also the motivation for him to work hard. In order to achieve this goal, he came to Ruan Gongwang's side after joining the army. He hoped that he could use the number 1 family to win glory for his family. Under his continuous efforts, the results were not bad. At least, he became a person that Ruan Gongwang trusted and became a general. This time, he finally had the opportunity to lead the army alone. How could he not be excited? Not to mention, Ruan Gongwang gave him a total of 50,000 soldiers because of Ruan Yongyang's experience. Although there were only 10,000 elites in Jiaoji, there were still 40,000 people from the Han captive army. According to Ruan Gongwang, didn't their mercenary army have a lot of landmines? Fine, I'll send 40,000 people to charge. I want to see if you have more landmines or my soldiers. After organizing the 50,000 soldiers, Hong Jinxiong set off. He wanted to let everyone see and know how outstanding the Hong family was. The 50,000 soldiers left Guangnan City in the afternoon. This was because the army had been mobilizing before the battle. Since the higher-ups had made the decision, all they had to do was pull the people out. Just as the 50,000 soldiers left the city, the people from the security bureau rushed out through the small path. They needed to inform the 6th young master of this news as soon as possible. Liang Mountain. It started to drizzle early in the morning, so much so that the entire mountain looked misty. It was like a paradise on earth. However, Ruan Yongyang had long lost the mood to appreciate such scenery. At this moment, his calves were wrapped in thick, coarse cloth. He was also carried to a wooden chair that had been temporarily made. Just like that, he looked into the distance with a gloomy gaze. The 3 military doctors had already said that his calf had been pierced by a sharp object, and the burns were severe. It was impossible for him to recover. The best result was that he could barely walk, but he would have to limp and wouldn't be able to pick up any speed. In short, he could no longer walk around like a normal person, let alone lead a battle in the future. Since when could a cripple lead an army of thousands to charge on the battlefield? The Ruan family was the number 1 family in Jiaoji. There were countless young generals like them. If he couldn't hold on, the family could just replace him with someone else. But to Ruan Yongyang, he would eventually be the one who would be abandoned by his family. Even if his uncle was Ruan Gongwang, he would not be able to fight in the future, and he had lost this battle so thoroughly. Ruan Yongyang's heart was like dead ashes. He could not see a trace of light and hope in his life. General, it's time to drink your medicine. A military doctor carefully walked in front of Ruan Yongyang. Clearly, he also knew that the young general was in a bad mood. Even though he was somewhat prepared, when Ruan Yongyang suddenly knocked over the bowl of medicine, the military doctor was still scared out of his wits. He trembled in fear and retreated. Scram! Will my body recover if I drink your medicine? He shouted loudly. At this moment, all the anger in his heart was vented on the military doctor. Of course, medicine could not cure the illness. It could only alleviate the symptoms. Faced with such a question, the military doctor naturally did not dare to speak the truth. He could only stand there with a wronged expression. Fortunately, the Chiliarch took the initiative to walk over and saved him. General, you should still drink your medicine no matter what. Your body is still the most important. No. None of this is important. This general has been defeated, and will become a cripple in the future. These are all facts. This is the most important thing. Ruan Yongyang shook his head continuously. His eyes were filled with a deathly aura. This silence lasted for about half the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Then Ruan Yongyang seemed to have returned to normal. He asked, "What's the situation outside now?" "No, it's not good." The Chiliarch hesitated for a moment, but still decided to report the truth. "We are now surrounded. There are mercenaries outside. They have blocked all our escape routes. It seems like they will launch a fatal attack at any time. How many people are there?" Ruan Yongyang asked with a cold expression. "I don't know. They are all over the mountains. I can't see how many people there are," the Chiliarch said with a helpless tone. In an instant, the atmosphere became much more oppressive. After another half a day, Ruan Yongyang took a few deep breaths. After a long struggle, he said, "How many people do we have left? When can the reinforcements be sent? We still have more than 1,500 people in our hands. Among them, 500 escaped. Because they were scared of being beaten, they affected the soldiers in our hands. Now that the morale of the army is unstable, the situation is very critical. We may collapse at any time. As for the reinforcements, we can't send any messages out now. We don't know what the situation outside is like." The Chiliarch was telling the truth. Ever since they were surrounded, they could not send any messages out. Even news from the outside could not be sent in. The only thing they could do now was to wait. Wait to be rescued, or all of them die here. "I don't know." Hearing this answer, Ruan Yinyang wanted to get angry. However, when he thought about how unstable the morale of the army was, he could only suppress the anger in his heart. "Go and tell the brothers that my uncle won't leave us to die. He will definitely come and save us. As long as we can survive these 2 days, we will definitely see hope. When the time comes, we will surround them and the center will bloom. At that time, everyone will be meritorious. Yes, I will speak to the brothers. However, General, you still have to take your medicine. Without a healthy body, we will not be able to see the day of victory." The Chiliarch was persuaded by these words. If they could really hold on until the reinforcements arrived, he would be able to protect Ruan Yongyang from death. This would undoubtedly be a great achievement. Looking at this layer of relationship, not only would he not be at fault, he might even be rewarded. Hearing the Chiliarch's advice and thinking that he still needed this person, Ruan Yongyang obediently took a new bowl of medicine and drank it. A bitter look flashed across his face as he said to the Chiliarch, "Continue to send people to contact the outside. No matter what, we cannot just sit here and wait." "General, don't worry. I will make the arrangements now." The Chiliarch also knew that if the news did not spread, their chances of survival would be greatly reduced. Outside the encirclement, a battalion of Lungfeng soldiers and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were scattered in all directions. Compared to the anxious Jiaoji soldiers in the encirclement, they were not anxious at all. On the contrary, those who were supposed to be dozing off were dozing off. Less than a third of them were left to monitor every movement within the encirclement. With such a force, even if they charged into the encirclement now, they were 100% confident that they could kill Ruan Yongyang. They could even guarantee their own safety. However, since there were orders from above that they were not allowed to charge now, all they could do was wait. Fortunately, from time to time, they would see Jiaoji soldiers trying to rush out to report the news. They could be used as live targets to practice their spears, so it was not too boring. Of course, things like practicing their spear skills were mostly done by the auxiliary soldiers. Only Jiaoji soldiers who truly wanted to charge out of their shooting range would attract the attention of the Lungfeng soldiers. The reason why they were called the most elite Lungfeng soldiers was because they were much stronger than the auxiliary soldiers in terms of spear skills. What were the auxiliary soldiers? They were the reserve soldiers of the Lungfeng soldiers. As long as they performed well enough, they could also join the Lungfeng soldiers. In order to achieve this goal, even though the orders from above were for the auxiliary soldiers to take turns to rest, most of them gave up on this authority. They hid in hidden places and carefully observed every movement in front of them, waiting for their target to appear. Bang! This was already the 3rd gunshot in an hour. As the gunshots rang out, complaints could be heard from the surrounding area. "Who is this? So fast. I just saw a figure, and he King opened fire. Do you have to be so anxious?" Of course, those who said such things were the kind of people who were envious and jealous. However, although they said such things, everyone's expression became more serious. They only hoped that they would be the next one to hit the target. The higher-ups had said that the person with the best performance this time would be promoted to Lungfeng. The prerequisite was that this person's cultural studies would meet the standards. Of course, the cultural studies would meet the standards. Those who could become auxiliary soldiers would seize the time to learn when they had the time. In order to pave the way for themselves to become Lungfeng soldiers, Most of the auxiliary soldiers were already at the 3rd grade of primary school and above. What they lacked now was an opportunity to become Lung Feng soldiers. Now that the opportunity was in front of them, who wouldn't want to grab it? Under such a tense competition, it would be a miracle if the surrounded Jiaoji soldiers wanted to run out to report the news. In such a competitive atmosphere, the surrounded Jiaoji soldiers' morale became weaker and weaker. If it wasn't for the fact that there were soldiers who wanted to surrender and ran outside while shouting to surrender but were still shot dead, these 1,000-over people would have already surrendered by now. Chapter 469. They did not charge, nor did they kill you, nor did they accept your surrender. Under such an atmosphere, the 1,000 Jiaoji soldiers were simply waiting for death. Without any spirit, they were all on the verge of mental collapse. Outside of Liang Mountain, the 50,000 soldiers were rushing over in a grandiose manner. Hong Jin was finally able to lead an army by himself, and it was a full 50,000 men. One could imagine how excited he was at this moment, so much so that he had forgotten his previous calm demeanor. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to enter Liang Mountain as quickly as possible. Putting aside whether or not he could destroy the mercenaries, he had to save Ruan Yongyang first. Even though the intelligence report said that Ruan Yongyang was injured and his right leg could not move, he was still a Ruan Yongyang. But no matter what, he was still a member of the Ruan family, and he was also General Ruan Gengwang's nephew. If he could save his life, he would receive a lot of gratitude from the Ruan family. Thinking about how the Hong clan could rise up in Jiaoji with the support of the Ruan clan, Hong Jin was extremely excited. Under such excitement and impatience, the 50,000 soldiers moved much faster than before. Even their formation had become somewhat disorderly. Some of the Han captives had blisters on their feet, and their stomachs were empty. However, Hong Jin did not care about any of this. He was only thinking about one thing, and that was to charge into Liang Mountain, save Ruan Yongyang, and destroy the mercenaries. Once he could accomplish these goals, what did it matter if the soldiers suffered a little? A general's success was built on 10,000 corpses. Which general did not rely on killing and sacrificing tens of thousands of people to become famous? Being stimulated by such a thought, it should take Hong Jin 2 days or almost 3 days to arrive at the periphery of Liangshan Mountain from Guangnan Prefecture. However, he did it in less than 2 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day after leaving Guangnan Prefecture, the army headed straight for the depths of Liang Mountain. Outside of Mount Liang, there were already Jiaoji army scouts waiting there. The reason why they could still stand there was not because the scouts did not have the ability to eliminate them, but because they wanted to keep them alive. If they wanted to enter the mountains, they needed someone to lead the way. After meeting up with the scouts left outside and finding out the location of Ruan Yongyang's army, Hong Jin didn't even let the army rest before charging in. Logically speaking, this method was not beneficial to the war, but Hong Jin was too eager to contribute. In his opinion, if he entered the mountain later, he would lose a chance to save Ruan Yongyang. This was something that he could not give up. As for whether the army was too tired, as long as General Ruan was saved, everyone could have a good rest. After all, they had 50,000 soldiers, which was 4 times more than the mercenaries. Even so, what was there to be afraid of? Under Hong Jin's lead, the army entered the rainforest. However, as soon as they entered, the marching speed of the army began to slow down. It was not that they did not want to go faster, but the road was too muddy. They could not go faster even if they wanted to. The temperature in the rainforest was humid and hot. In addition, there were all kinds of poisonous insects roaming around. Logically speaking, the army should be resting and reorganizing. At the very least, they should be in formation. However, Hong Jin, who wanted to contribute, had thrown all of this to the back of his mind. Under his strict orders, the 50,000 soldiers were split into dozens of groups, and their original formation was completely messed up. This was especially true for the 40,000 Han captives. Those who were in good conditions wore cloth shoes while those who were in poor conditions wore straw shoes. However, no matter what kind of shoes they wore, once they stepped into the muddy ground, their shoes would become useless. Thus they could only walk barefoot. Furthermore, The dense forest was filled with gravel. If they were not careful, they would be scratched by the gravel. This greatly hindered their speed. In just 4 to 6 hours, when the sky darkened, the Han captives were already 6 to 7 kilometers away from the Jiaoji army. Under such a distance, they naturally became Yang Chendong's main targets. Last time, when they were attacked, Yang Chendong made up his mind and did not have any intention of taking any captives. However, that was because the situation forced him to do so. After all, the Han captives were mixed together with the Jiaoji army, and it was not easy to differentiate between them. Furthermore, there were landmines everywhere. If he was not careful, he might even hurt himself. As such, he could only retract his thoughts of taking in more captives. However, it was different this time. Now that the Han captives were completely separated from the Jiaoji army, his worries were lessened. Furthermore, the 40,000 Han captives were also a big appetizer. It was worth Yang Chendong's effort. In Yang Chendong's plan, the task of surrounding the Han captives was given to the auxiliary regiment commander Lu Zhuo. Lu Zhuo could not only lead 8 battalions of auxiliary soldiers armed with Type 81 rifles, but also 14 battalions of temporary auxiliary soldiers. A total of 9,000 soldiers were more than enough to deal with the 40,000 Han captives who were already exhausted and without any morale. Pass down the order. Once the Jiaoji army and Ruanyongyang merge together, we will immediately cut them off. After that, we will surround all of the Han captives. Try not to let anyone escape. Lu Zhuo, political commissar Songjia, and a few auxiliary battalion commanders discuss for a while before immediately giving out the order. Following which, the 9,000 mercenaries started to move. They quickly moved towards the gathering point according to the plan. Hong Jin did not care too much about all of this. Even though he could feel that there were enemies around him, he still had a lot of soldiers. However, when he thought about how he had 50,000 men, and the enemy only had 10,000, his worries disappeared. In comparison, he did not think that the mercenaries could do anything to him. With such arrogant thoughts, Hong Jin rushed all the way and finally found the location of Ruanyongyang's camp. The auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Army purposely opened up a path, allowing the enemy forces to successfully converge. Hong Jin had come, and he had brought 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers with him. After hearing that there were 40,000 Han captives behind him, the 1,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had lost their will to live became excited. Even the half-crippled Ruanyongyang revealed a smile for the first time in a few days. His right leg was about to be crippled, but at least he was still alive. As long as he could live, who would want to die? Not to mention, after the two armies met up, there was still a chance for him to win the battle. If that was the case, if he handled it well, he might not be the defeated general anymore. He might even become the king of Yu in the eyes of others. General Hong, you've worked hard. When he saw the travel-worn Hong Jin and the 10,000 soldiers behind him, Ruanyongyang, who was being carried, immediately smiled. General Ruan, you've worked hard. Your leg. Hong Jin was shocked when he saw that Ruanyongyang had lost at least 6 to 7 kilograms in just a few days. It's fine. How can anyone not get injured on the battlefield? However, since General Hong is here, you must avenge me. You must kill all of these mercenaries and show the might of the Jiaoji army. Ruanyongyang did not like others to talk about his injured leg. Therefore, he changed the topic to the battlefield. Yes, since I'm here, of course, I must destroy the mercenaries. Hong Jin said confidently. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the sound of firecrackers rang out from the outside. Then one of his Kiliarchs ran over in a panic. He half knelt in front of Hong Jin and said nervously, General, something bad has happened. The mercenaries suddenly attacked our camp and killed hundreds of our men. So fast. Hong Jin was furious when he heard that the mercenaries did not wait for his army to settle down before attacking. However, he suddenly thought of something and asked, Oh right, what about the Han captives behind us? Have they not caught up with us? No, we were originally 6 to 7 kilometers away from them. Now that we heard the gunshots, I'm afraid they won't dare to approach us. The Kiliarchs answered honestly. What? They're that far away? Clearly, Hong Jin only wanted to save Ruanyongyang. He did not care much about the 40,000 Han captives behind him. This was also why he could only become a deputy general and rarely led an army. The overall situation was still a problem. As soon as he said this, Hong Jin knew that this was the truth. His Chiliarch wouldn't dare to joke about something like this. After hesitating for a moment, he ordered, "Immediately send someone to contact the Han captives. Tell them to come closer to us. At the same time, we have to do our best to get close to them. First, we have to deal with the mercenaries between us." Hong Jin had never thought that he would lose against 10,000 mercenaries with 50,000 men. At most, he would have to pay a heavy price. It was precisely because of Hong Jin's arrogance and contempt that he lost the initiative in the war from the very beginning. He was completely led by the nose by others. He also did not know that at this moment, he would never be able to meet up with the 40,000 Han captives. Speaking of which, the Han captives really wanted to meet up with the Jiaoji army. In this chaotic world, how important was it to have a strong backer? Even though they couldn't compare to the Jiaoji army in terms of treatment and other aspects, they could still eat their fill if they followed them. They also didn't have to worry about their lives when the sun rose the next day. Just this alone was enough to make some of the weaker ones want to follow them. However, it was not a matter of whether they wanted to follow them or not. Instead, the Han captives could not charge through the forest that did not seem too dense, but it was deep and unfathomable. Everything had changed in an instant. Although they were a bit slow, the Han captives were closing the distance between them and the Jiaoji army. All of a sudden, the sound of firecrackers rang out from the front. Then everything became a little chaotic. Chapter 470. Before the middle and rear of the army could figure out what was going on, the front had already sent back news that the road ahead had been blocked. Just a moment ago, at least 300 people had fallen to the ground without any warning, accompanied by the sound of gunfire. They were not unfamiliar with firearms, especially since Zhang Fu had led the Great Ming firearms squad to defeat the original Jiaoji army a few decades ago, changing this place into Jiaoji Prefecture. When they came, they had heard from their superiors that the enemy mercenaries also had firearms. It was one thing to know about it, but it was another thing to actually face it. Especially when they heard that the gunshots were so dense and that more than 300 of their brothers had died. It was normal for the front line to panic for a moment. The main general, Hong Jin, had already left them. At this moment, only 4 captains of the Han captives remained. Compared to ordinary soldiers, they were taller and more muscular. It was precisely because of this that they were able to be promoted. Their names were Zhang Qingli, the 2 middle captains, Zhou Hong and Ma Yinghui, and the rear captains Lu Hong. Other than Lu Hong, who was at the back, who did not immediately follow up, the other 3 captains gathered together nervously and began to discuss a plan. Ma Hui was the first to speak. "The situation is obvious. This is clearly the mercenaries trying to cut off our communication with General Hong and the others, and then they want to take us down one by one." Ma Hui's words had some insight. At least his analysis was correct. However, he did not expect that the mercenaries not only wanted to cut off their communication, but also wanted to kill or capture them. Another captain of the Middle Army, Zhou Hong, quickly expressed his opinion. "That's not possible. Didn't the news say that they only have 10,000 people? They want to make an enemy out of 50,000 people with this little number of soldiers. Aren't they a little too arrogant?" Zhou Hong was a little chubby, but he had a pair of small eyes. Humans were just like him. They liked to use their brains. It was no wonder that he would have such an analysis. "I don't know if they are arrogant or not. Anyway, their muskets are very powerful. You don't know. At the beginning, it was like rain. A Chiliarch under my command wanted to prepare people to charge, but he was shot dead after shouting a few words." The one who spoke was Zhang Qingli, a major of the vanguard. His body was still trembling as he spoke. He had seen everything clearly, which was why he was so nervous and afraid. When Zhou Hong heard Zhang Qingli's words, his eyes lit up. "Brother Zhang, did you just say that the enemy's muskets rained down like rain?" "Yes, these are my true feelings," he said as if he was swearing an oath. "Well, if this is true, then there should be a lot of mercenaries in front of us." They should have gathered their strength together to give off such a feeling. If that's the case, why don't we break through from another direction? The rainforest is so big. Even if they can guard it for a while, they won't be able to guard all the roads. Ma Yinghui immediately agreed, but he added, brothers, we're all too tired from rushing all the way here. Why don't we let everyone rest for a while, and wait until dawn to attack again? This way, we'll be able to unleash our full strength. Yes, but we can't be too late. After all, if we don't appear in front of General Hong Jin, who knows what he will think and whether he will blame us? Zhou Hong nodded and agreed with this statement. If the army was too tired, they wouldn't be able to display their full strength. Under such circumstances, they would be at a disadvantage on the battlefield. Seeing that the two major commanders had reached a consensus, Zhang Qingli immediately said, since that's the case, I will tell our brothers to stop charging and take the time to rest. Also, send someone to inform Major Lu Hong to bring up the rear. With everyone gathered together, our strength will be greater. I agree. Zhou Hong and Ma Yinghui both nodded their heads and reached a consensus. They decided to take a good rest first and wait until dawn to launch their counterattack. The Han captives became obedient. This made the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers around them become dispirited. They wanted to perform meritorious deeds. This was especially true for some of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. After witnessing the power of the Type 81 assault rifle, especially the Type 95, their hearts were filled with the desire to perform meritorious deeds. Once they entered the auxiliary soldiers, or even better, the cold front, wouldn't they also have a firearm that could easily take someone's life from a few hundred meters away? When they thought about how they could kill an enemy with just a flick of their finger, they felt extremely excited. All right, you guys have a lot to fight. This time, we are targeting the entire Jiaoji. As for now, those who are sleeping are sleeping. Those who are on duty are on duty. The higher-ups have said that there will be a fierce battle tomorrow morning. Just when everyone was thinking about how to perform meritorious deeds, a new order was passed down. In the darkness of the night, it was passed down one by one to the 9,000 auxiliary and temporary soldiers. The auxiliary and temporary soldiers seemed to have reached some sort of agreement with the Han captives, and became quiet. However, in front of them, 3 battalions of the Cold Vanguard and 4 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were pressing forward, closing in on the Jiaoji soldiers that they had surrounded. At this moment, the sky was completely dark. Even though there was moonlight and it wasn't to the extent where one couldn't see one's fingers, the visibility wasn't high either. In this kind of weather, other than siege battles that could be carried out with the help of torches, other battles couldn't be fought. This had become a tacit agreement that had been established for thousands of years. After all, the sky was so dark that anything could happen. If things went wrong, it would be normal for their own people to fight each other. Only an idiot would choose to launch an attack at night. However, this didn't include the Yang family army. Putting aside the fact that the auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Vanguard often had night battles as part of their training, did they treat their forest training as a game? The main purpose of their training was to learn how to engage in night battles in the rainforest to protect themselves and eliminate their opponents. Now it was finally time to put it to good use. Every soldier carried 2 basic rounds of ammunition. Coupled with the night vision goggles on their heads, the night was no longer dark. Everything was presented in front of them. From the moment they launched their attack, they had been suppressing the Jiaoji soldiers, and were still advancing. Gunshots rang out from all directions and it was drizzling. In such an oppressive atmosphere, there were Jiaoji soldiers dying at every moment. Urgent battle reports were sent to Hongjin and Ruanyanyang. From the start of the battle until now, 4 hours had passed. It was already the middle of the night, and the Jiaoji army that originally had over 10,000 soldiers had paid the price of 5,000 deaths. In just 4 hours, half of the army had perished. Moreover, in the early stages of the battle, the formation of the Jiaoji army was too scattered. The battle report showed that as the battle progressed and the Jiaoji army became more concentrated, the death toll increased even faster. Under the temporary wooden tent, General Hong Jin no longer had the calm and natural demeanor of a commander. Instead, his face was dark and his body was trembling in anger. He originally thought that saving Ruan Yinyang and eliminating the mercenaries would be a great achievement. However, he didn't expect that as soon as he arrived and saw Ruan Yinyang, before he could even say a few words, the pressure would suddenly appear. He who was supposed to save someone, became someone who was supposed to be saved. Compared to Hong Jin, who didn't say a word, Ruan Yinyang, who was sitting on a chair, looked even more dispirited. He leaned against the back of the chair and looked up at the sky. If not for his mouth moving from time to time, others would have thought that he was already a dead man. Lost, completely lost. I'm going to die, I'm going to die. These were the words that Ruan Yinyang had been muttering. However, at this moment, no one paid attention to his actions. This was because another Chiliarch had rushed into the temporary wooden tent with an anxious expression. He then shouted with an anxious tone. Not good, news just came from the front. The nearest mercenary group is less than a kilometer away from us. So close? When Hong Jin heard this, he turned around in disbelief. He rushed to the map under the coal lamp and looked at it. Is there any news from the Han captives? Hong Jin asked the 1,000-man commander who reported the news. Is there any news from the Han captives? The 1,000-man commander nodded. No, I sent people to contact them. However, they were always shot to death not long after they rushed out of the camp. I also found soldiers with good hearing. They told me that there were no gunshots coming from behind us. General Hong, is it possible that they have already surrendered to the mercenaries? The Chiliarch asked nervously and carefully. Although he knew that it wasn't possible, why was there no movement from the other side when he was fighting so fiercely? Of course, he didn't know that gunshots usually traveled as far as 3 kilometers away. If the terrain, vegetation, season, specific time, air temperature and humidity, as well as nearby noise decibels and wind direction were taken into account, the gunshots would only be heard as far as 1 kilometer away. Unless one was very familiar with gunshots, one wouldn't pay too much attention to it even if one occasionally heard such a sound. The Chiliarch raised his doubts. Hong Jin simply waved his hand and said, That's impossible. The Han captives have never come into contact with the mercenaries before. How could they surrender here? Chapter 471. Hong Jin spoke with certainty, but only he knew that he did not have much confidence in his heart. After all, ever since the Han captives were established, they had been treated unfairly. Perhaps they would really surrender. However, in front of his subordinates he could only continue to encourage them. Like this, pass down the order that we must hold on. As long as we can hold on until dawn, the 40,000 Han captives will definitely gather around us. At that time, we will be safe. Also, tell the soldiers that the bullets of the guns are limited. No matter how strong the mercenaries are, they cannot continue to shoot without limit. As long as they do not have guns, they can only choose to fight in close combat. That way our chance will come. Yes, I will immediately pass on the general's words to the brothers. The Chiliarch's eyes lit up upon hearing this. He had already lost all confidence, but after hearing Hong Jin's words, he felt a lot better. He even had an idea of his own. General, do you think we should launch a counterattack when we discover that the enemy's muskets are firing slowly? That way, we might be able to snatch some muskets back. Hearing the captain's suggestion, Hong Jin's eyes lit up. Very good. Go and tell the soldiers that when there is such an opportunity, they must take the initiative to attack. If anyone can snatch a gun back, they will be promoted by 1 rank and rewarded with 50 taels of silver. Seeing that his suggestion was accepted, the captain was very happy. He quickly nodded and went to pass on the order. However, he did not know that the scene he was waiting for would not come true. The guns that were developed in the Ming dynasty were flintlocks. They were the type that could only fire 1 shot after being loaded. Once it was fired a few times, the barrel, body, and especially the rifling would be easily damaged. It would need to rest for a while before firing again. However, the Type 95 guns used by the mercenaries did not have such concerns. Most of these guns were taken out by Yang Chendong from the warehouse. They were modern products. On average, each gun could fire 30,000 bullets without any problem. Even the Type 81 assault rifles made by Crimson City, were made after the steel technology was matured. The quality was naturally not as good as the Type 81 assault rifles in the warehouse. However, it could fire 5,000 bullets without any problem. This was especially true for the type that was created later. Not to mention the accuracy. After testing, it was already guaranteed that it could hit 8,000 to 10,000 rounds. And this would continue to improve. After all, with the advanced books and samples from the warehouse, as long as he worked hard, he would be able to catch up. Based on this, it was impossible for the Chiliarch to wait for the mercenaries to run out of bullets or have problems with their guns before retaliating. But then again, it wasn't as if they didn't have a chance at all. For example, after a series of strong attacks that wiped out a large portion of the enemy's forces, the enemy's forces would gather together, and they would be able to use the terrain to reflect arrows. Cold Vanguard and the auxiliary troops' attack speed would also slow down. Slowing down didn't mean that he wasn't attacking. Yang Chendong had already given the order that they had to take down the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers by the night. This was related to whether they could successfully take over the 40,000 Han captives. Thus, the reason why they slowed down their attack speed was so that they could launch a better attack next time. Just like now, the dense gunfire suddenly stopped. This was because Cold Vanguard and the auxiliary troops were moving forward under the cover of the night. This was to ensure that they could get closer to the enemy. Then, the power of the grenades would be revealed. At that time, the enemy would be unable to make use of the terrain, and would be razed to the ground. However, before this ferocious attack started, the Jiaoji soldiers had the misconception that the mercenaries' guns had run out of bullets or that there was a problem with the guns. Just like the Chiliarch's order, the Jiaoji soldiers thought that their opportunity had arrived. From the moment they were attacked in the dark, they had been passively attacked. They couldn't even see the enemy's shadow clearly. This made the prideful Jiaoji soldiers very vexed. Now that there was an opportunity to retaliate, everyone wanted to grab hold of it. Thus, the Jiaoji soldiers started to gather together. There were around 400 people on one side, and 200 to 300 people on the other side. They were prepared to charge out and snatch the guns. This would allow them to be promoted by one rank and receive 50 taels of silver. With the material reward, everyone's actions were indeed much faster. When they were about to gather, the full force of the retaliation began. More than a dozen teams suddenly charged out from all directions. The smallest team had around 100 people, while the largest team had around 400 people. This kind of planned large-scale counterattack not only highlighted the element of surprise, but more importantly, the soldiers were also spread out. They thought that even if they encountered a counterattack from the muskets, there would still be some fish that escaped the net. Once the fish rushed to the front of the mercenaries, the advantage would come to them. The sudden counterattack had indeed caught the mercenaries off guard. However, it was only in their eyes that they were surprised. This was because at this moment, the Yang family soldiers were also preparing to launch a frontal assault with grenades. They were just worried that they couldn't locate the enemy's main force. Now they had taken the initiative to jump out. This was like someone giving them a pillow when they wanted to sleep. How could they not grab hold of such an opportunity? Otherwise, it would be a waste of their reputation as the elite Cold Vanguard soldiers. Therefore, after a short pause, the excited Cold Vanguard soldiers started to retaliate. No one knew which company or platoon it started from. The powerful grenades in their hands were thrown out as if they were free. Boom, 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 boom. When the flames lit up, there was also the scene of all kinds of things flying into the sky, as well as all kinds of screams and howls. After the first attack, the other troops quickly retaliated. The grenades in their hands were immediately pulled out of their bracelets and thrown towards the Jiaoji army. The originally quiet night became lively again, even more fiery than before. Of course, with their cooperation, countless Jiaoji soldiers were blasted away, killed or torn apart. Under the loud boom, the forest shook. Countless animals in the forest scattered in all directions. They felt as if the end of the world had arrived. All that was left was to flee in panic. In comparison, the days in the temporary Jiaoji wooden tent were also very difficult. When they heard the first explosion, Hong Jin and Ruan Yongyang's faces fell. After the continuous explosions, Guan Yongyang was already slumped on a chair. Hong Jin was not much better. His entire body was swaying, and his pupils could no longer focus. They originally thought that this would be a chance for them to retaliate. At the very least, they would be able to take back a large portion of the territory that they had lost, giving them more space to maneuver. This way, it would not be difficult for them to hold on until the next day and wait for the Han captives to arrive. Who would have thought that it would cause such a huge commotion? What kind of opponent were they facing? There were landmines before, and what the hell was this? However, regardless of whether the two of them had thought it through, the situation at the front was already unsalvageable. If they continued to defend, although they would still fail in the end, they could at least hold on for a little longer. However, now that they had taken the initiative to attack, it was like sending sheep to the tiger's den. There was no way for them to survive. In less than an hour, the 5,000 men that were sent out were completely annihilated. Those who were lucky did not die immediately, but were left with half a breath of life. When the Cold Vanguard Battalion charged forward, they did not even have the qualifications to waste a single bullet. They were all killed by the bayonets of the Cold Vanguard Battalion. In the end, the 5,000 men were sent out, and there were only 100 men left in the camp. Facing the attacks of 3 Cold Vanguard battalions, 1 regiment's Cold Vanguard company, and 4 battalions auxiliary soldiers, these 100 men did not even last half an hour before they were all killed. When the Vanguard Battalion commander Wuxia rushed into the wooden tent with a few of his trusted subordinates, only Hong Jin and Guan Yongyang were left. The moment Wuxia rushed in, his tall figure appeared under the coal lamp, and a long blade slashed towards him. Scram! Wuxia shouted angrily. He blocked and pulled out his bayonet, causing the long saber to slash to the side. Then, with a stab, the sound of a saber entering the abdomen was heard. Blood flowed out from the abdomen. The one who slashed was Guan Yongyang. Knowing that he was going to die, he launched a final counterattack with the thought that killing one was enough, and killing 2 was worth it. However, his right leg was not very nimble, and he could only slash with all his strength. His body did not move, and the momentum of the blade did not change. Secondly, his opponent was Battalion Commander Wuxia. This person had stayed in the Yangqindong manor for a long time, and was specially trained by Yangqindong in the art of stabbing. It was only a slash, and it was not enough to hurt him. Guan Yongyang stared blankly as the bayonet pierced his lower abdomen. Following Wuxiang's habitual movements of twisting, stabbing, and then pulling out the bayonet, Guan Yongyang's eyes rolled back as he fell from the chair with a plop. His body violently gasped for breath twice before he was completely dead, no longer able to move. Guan Yongyang died just like that, dying in front of Hong Jin. This huge shock caused him to kneel on the ground with a thud. "Please don't kill me. I am willing to surrender. I know a lot about Jiaoji, and I will definitely be useful to you, definitely." Hong Jin's greatest dream was to lead the entire Hong family, and in order to achieve this goal, he was willing to do anything. However, the more scheming a person was, the more they feared death. Chapter 472. Scheming people like to think. They weren't like straightforward people who didn't care too much about death. Furthermore, there was no chance of a comeback. Surrendering was the best way out. With Hong Jin's intelligence, how could he not see this? Hence, his kneeling wasn't that sudden. Cowards weren't welcomed on the battlefield. Furthermore, the 6th young master had given the order to wipe out the entire Jiaoji army. Hence, even if Hong Jin knelt, the cold front soldiers who rushed into the tent didn't have any intention of letting him go. One of them even raised his bayonet and wanted to stab him. Lung Feng's movement frightened Hong Jin quite a bit. Although he was kneeling on the ground, it did not stop his body from rapidly retreating. Even so, the gleaming bayonet under the light of the coal lamp was getting closer and closer to him. "Stop!" Fortunately, the moment the bayonet was about to reach him, Wuxia suddenly spoke. With Wuxiang's shout, Lung Feng, who was about to charge forward with his bayonet, stopped moving. This was a good habit that had been cultivated under iron discipline. After shouting, Wuxia took a few large steps forward. After leaping over the cold front soldier, he stared coldly at Hong Jin and said, I hope you're useful. If you don't prove yourself useful, you'll end up like him. Wu Sheng's cold voice rang out as he pointed at Ruan Yongyang, who had already been stabbed to death and was still bleeding profusely from his body. After escaping from the brink of death, Hong Jin was already scared out of his wits. He didn't dare to have any other thoughts. He immediately nodded and said, "Sir, please don't worry. Please don't worry. I'll definitely cooperate with you." "Alright, then let me ask you. Who is he? Who are you? Also, what's the current situation of the Jiaoji army? Are there any fish that escaped the net?" Wu Sheng continued to interrogate. The sky was too dark. No one could be sure if the entire Jiaoji army was here, or if their higher-ups were hiding. The reason why Wu Sheng didn't consider escaping was because he was confident. There were scouts on the periphery of the battlefield. They were the best of the best in cold front. Trying to escape from under their noses was simply wishful thinking. "Sir, the one who died is called Ruan Yongyang. He is General Ruan Gengwang's nephew. My name is Hong Jin. I am Ruan Gengwang's deputy general. This time, I am in charge of leading 50,000 soldiers to fight against you. Right now, I don't know what's going on with the Han captives, but the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers that came later should all be dead. Even if some of them were lucky enough to survive, they should be heavily injured." In order to survive, Hong Jin really said whatever he wanted to say. However, he didn't use an affirmative tone for things he didn't know. This was where he was smart. If he knew, he knew. If he didn't know, he didn't know. Oh. When Wu Sheng heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. He originally thought that the upper echelons of the Jiaoji army would be in hiding, and it would take some effort to find them. Unexpectedly, all of them were here. How could he not be happy about this? He didn't think about it. It had only been 6 hours since the cold front attacked. The sky wasn't even bright yet. Where could they have escaped to in such a short time? Men, take him away. Also, send someone to search the area. Find a few injured Jiaoji soldiers, and ask them about this person's identity. Even though Wu Sheng already believed half of it, he still needed to verify it. It would be too embarrassing if he was cheated. Hong Jin was tied up. His being tied up meant the end of the Jiaoji army. When this news was quickly reported to Yang Qindong's tent behind him, he still heaved a sigh of relief even though he had expected it. He had planned a lot for this battle in order to achieve a one-hit kill. Even though he had the advantage in many aspects, if the first battle wasn't fought well, it would affect the morale of the army. From the looks of it now, the situation was stable. Inform them that this Hong Jin can be used. Let him repent for his crimes first. Let him persuade the remaining 40,000 Han captives. Yang Qindong happily made the decision. With the idea of making use of trash, he handed the matter of recruiting the Han captives to Hong Jin. If Hong Jin did this well, it would be best. On the other hand, even if there were any mishaps, they wouldn't lose anything. Therefore, when the sun had just risen, when the 4 captains were discussing and preparing to launch an attack, Hong Jin had already appeared 300 meters in front of them. The 4 captains were very happy that Hong Jin would appear in front of them. However, when they walked out of the tent, they heard Hong Jin urging them to put down their weapons and surrender to the mercenaries. "Generals, the Jiaoji army was finished last night. Ruan Yongyang was killed and I became their captive. Today, I am here to ask you to surrender." After explaining the situation, Hong Jin lowered his head and said in a dejected voice, "The mercenaries are too strong. They have guns that we have never seen before. If we continue to resist, we will die. If I'm smart, I will surrender like you. They also said that since you are all Han, they will not make things difficult for you." Hong Jin was actually here to persuade them to surrender. This was naturally out of everyone's expectations. The 4 captains were unprepared and looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The other party did not respond. This made the officers of the 2nd Regiment, who were lying in ambush behind Hong Jin, anxious. One of them asked, "Can this Hong Jin do it? If he can't, we need to prepare for a counterattack." "He can, as long as he doesn't want to die." The commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Po, was confident. "Not bad. This Hong Jin is quite eloquent." The political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia said with a smile. He had chatted with Hong Jin for a while, and found that other than the fear on his face, Hong Jin was very rational. Such a smart person would definitely know that if he couldn't complete this mission, he would die. In order to survive, he had to make this happen. The officers of the 2nd Regiment were still looking in their direction. Hong Jin, who was standing there, was already anxious. When he arrived, he saw with his own eyes a cold vanguard soldier easily knock down a bird from 700 meters away. That scene shocked him so much that his eyes widened. Right now, less than 600 meters behind him, there was more than one Lung Feng aiming their guns at him. If he dared to make the slightest move, he would definitely be riddled with holes. Just based on this, he did not have any other ideas. The only thing he could do was to convince the other party to surrender. Seeing that the Han captives didn't react, Hong Jin could only continue. What's wrong? Aren't you all Han Chinese? Are you not honest people? Do you really want to be enslaved by us Jiaoji people? Do you really want to be treated unfairly? If you don't want to, then surrender. This way, not only will you not die, you will also be able to live a life of dignity. Isn't this what you want? What are you waiting for? You have already seen the power of the powerful firearms in the mercenaries' hands. I don't mind telling you that this is not their full strength. They also have something called a hand grenade that can be thrown dozens of meters away. Once it lands, it will cause a terrifying explosion. With this, over 10,000 of our Jiaoji elites were wiped out in just 6 hours. Tell me, what do you have to fight with them? You can even do something like surrendering to us Jiaoji. Is there anything wrong with surrendering to the Ming army and the Han? Hurry up and make a decision. Otherwise, I can guarantee that before the sky turns dark, 1/10 of the 40,000 of you will still be alive. That would be extremely fortunate. Hong Jinji tried his best to persuade them. His earnest and well-intentioned appearance made it seem like he was about to kneel down in front of the Han captives. His efforts were not without benefits. At the very least, some of the captives showed signs of loosening up. However, most of them still looked at the 4 captains. After all, they were their generals. What do we do? Being stared at by so many subordinates, the 4 captains felt immense pressure. One of them, Zhou Hong, looked at the 3 people beside him and asked, "The Jiaoji army has already been defeated. What else can we do? Just surrender. After all, this isn't the first time we've done something like this." Captain Ma Hui revealed a mocking smile, as though he was mocking himself and the others for their weakness and lack of determination. We can surrender, but we should at least talk about some conditions. At the very least, we should be treated as humans. Even though we had no choice but to surrender to the Jiaoji army back then, we had no other choice. Lu Hong, who had just arrived, expressed his opinion. His words caused the other 3 captains to nod in agreement. Clearly, they all had the same thoughts. After the vote, Captain Zhang Qingli took 5 steps forward and said, "We can surrender, but we need to talk to the general of the mercenaries. We need some conditions." Bah! Just as he finished speaking, the sound of a gunshot rang out. Then, the sword at his waist fell from his body and fell to the ground. You don't have the right to talk about conditions with us. Surrendering means surrendering. Following the gunshot, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia's voice rang out. After saying this, he turned to the regiment commander Luo Pe and said, "The marksmanship of the Ghost Sniper Squad is truly amazing. In the future, if we have the chance, we should also train a few sharpshooters. They will be very useful." Chapter 473. That's right. He nodded as if he had experienced the same thing. Luo Pe knew that the shot just now was fired by the Ghost Sniper team who had rushed over to provide support. From a distance of at least 700 meters, one shot was able to hit the opponent's saber without hurting anyone. This marksmanship was really amazing. Luo Pe and Kong Jia both sighed at the beauty of this shot, not to mention the Han captives. After witnessing this amazing marksmanship, they were all dumbfounded. Then, their faces were filled with terror. They finally understood why Hong Jin said that they could not defeat the mercenaries. As for Zhang Qingli, who was standing there with a look of fairness, he stood there with a dumbfounded expression. However, when he came back to his senses, it was as if he did not know anything. Just like now, his entire body was trembling. Clearly, he was greatly frightened by this shot. Even the captains were behaving like this, let alone the ordinary soldiers. Out of fear, someone threw down the weapon in his hand and shouted, "Don't shoot me, I surrender." Then more people threw their weapons to the ground and squatted down. This was like a plague, causing more and more people to throw down their weapons and squat down. After a while, even the captains were squatting down. After all, no one was not afraid of death. Especially when there was no need to fight to the death and there was no great hatred between them. Surrendering was not shameful. Close to 40,000 Han captives surrendered just like that, and things went unexpectedly smoothly. Following the 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Po's order, more and more mercenaries appeared in the surrounding rainforest. They came out in all directions, coming in front of the Han captives, and starting to capture them. News of victory could always shake people's hearts. Even Yang Chendong, who had expected things to go smoothly, was so excited when he heard the news from the scouts at the front. Good, since things are going so smoothly, let's carry out the second step of the plan and start moving. Guangnan Prefecture. At this moment, it was already empty. For days after Hongjin left the city with 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers and 40,000 Han captives, without receiving any news from the front lines, Wan Gengwang finally couldn't hold himself back and made his move. He could not wait any longer. He led the remaining 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers out of the city and charged toward the Langsun region. It was no wonder that Wan Gengwang gave up on Guangnan Prefecture. Scouts had reported that Wang Mubin's subordinates in the nearby Shiping were marching toward them. Previously, when he had 100,000 soldiers, he was not afraid of the Mu clan's army. But now, he only had 30,000 soldiers. Even he could not believe that he could still defend Guangnan Prefecture. Rather than putting themselves in danger, it would be better to retreat first and join up with the other troops. Once they had enough strength, they would be able to take back the city. Feeling wronged, Wan Gengwang led 20,000 soldiers into the Langsun region. The fact that there was no news from 2 armies in a row made him a lot smarter. When the army entered the mountains, they sent out many scouts to scout the situation in front of them and prevent them from falling into a trap set by the mercenaries. But no matter how careful Wan Gengwang was and how many scouts he sent out, there was no news at all. It was not just the mercenaries. Even the 70,000 men he sent out did not receive any news. It was as if they had all disappeared into thin air. The mercenaries only had 10,000 men. It was possible for them to disappear into the vast rainforest. But what about his 70,000 men? Where did they go? They couldn't have all been killed, right? It had been less than 10 days since the beginning. Even if there were 70,000 pigs in the rainforest, it was impossible for all of them to be captured. Wan Gengwang, who could not figure out what was going on, was frightened. His army slowed down even more. He sent out more and more scouts. Many of them were elites who were very familiar with the rainforest. He did not believe that they could not find any clues. The people who knew the rainforest the best were the Jiaoji people who had lived here since young. With their rich experience and common sense, they did find some useful clues. However, they paid a heavy price for it. For example, every time they were about to find a clue, the scouts they sent out would step on a landmine and be sent to the afterlife. This wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. In fact, it would happen dozens or even hundreds of times in a single day. As a result, every single scout had to be extremely careful when they took a step forward, fearing that they would step on a landmine that could send them to the afterlife. Just like that, they finally found a huge mound of dirt on the 7th day after entering the mountains. Wan Gengwang rushed there and ordered people to dig up the fresh-looking mound of dirt. What they saw were countless corpses. From their clothes to their figures, one could tell that they were all Jiaoji soldiers. As they dug deeper, the mound of dirt grew bigger. On the 10th day, they found Ruan Yongyang's corpse. Although it was badly decomposed, Wan Gengwang still recognized his nephew. He was furious and swore that he would kill the mercenaries to avenge his nephew. Under the loud roar, the scouts found a new clue. They found some traces, which should be left behind by the army during their march. Although they tried to cover it up, They were still seen through by the experienced scouts. Looking at the direction of the army, they were heading straight for the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi. Are you sure that the army is heading towards Hanoi? Wang Gengwang asked with cold sweat on his forehead. He suppressed his sadness when he heard the scouts report. Yes, we are sure that they are heading towards Hanoi, the new scout captain said confidently. They really have guts. When Wang Gengwang said these words, there was some admiration in his voice. However, he quickly reacted and said, immediately send the most elite people to inform Hanoi of what happened here. At the same time, inform His Majesty and ask them to prepare to face the enemy. My troops will follow behind and attack from both sides. We will completely kill them in our Jiaoji territory. Wang Gengwang gritted his teeth as he spoke. It was obvious that his nephew's death was a huge blow to him. The scout captain agreed and went to make the arrangements. More than 10 elite scouts immediately rushed towards Hanoi. They wanted to inform the king of the general's intentions as soon as possible, so that the country could be better prepared. Xianan Village. This Xianan County of Vietnam's Quang Ninh province was just a village near the sea. The entire village only had about 400 people. With such a population, it was already considered a large village. At this moment, the village was bustling with noise and was very busy. The original natives had all become captives and were being transported to the ships. Along with them were 40,000 Han captives. Needless to say, the ones who could do this were the mercenaries. In fact, their leader Yang Chendong was currently drinking tea in a pavilion by the shore. Beside him were Commander Lu Pu, Political Commissar Kong Jie, and the rest. Sitting opposite him was indeed the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Nha Tong. They came from the nearby Yongshire Island. Because Commander Gao Xiong had other missions at sea, Nha Tong had the chance to complete the mission of receiving people and delivering equipment. Naturally, they were referring to the 40,000 Han captives. The more developed Crimson City was, the more insufficient the population was. Many of the newly built factories were operated by one person, or even 3 or 4 people. With the addition of these 40,000 people, the pressure could be alleviated. As for delivering equipment, it was naturally weapons and ammunition. War could not do without such things, especially when the mercenaries were alone. After a battle, who knew how much ammunition and grenades they would use? If they could not replenish them in time, it would be very dangerous. Yang Chendong had long considered this problem, and came up with the idea of delivering equipment by the seaside. The equipment was delivered early, and the people were pulled onto the ship. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Only then did Nha Tong have time to sit in front of Yang Chendong. Nha Tong was also one of the earliest people to join Lung Feng. He had followed Gao Xiong to Jianing Mansion to take advantage of the Yang family. After being subdued, he was dead set on following the 6th young master. Furthermore, through his outstanding performance, he became the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, a high-ranking officer of the Navy. It seemed that 4 years had passed. Although time had passed, Nha Tong's respect for Yang Chendong had not decreased. On the contrary, it had increased. In particular, Rezken City was getting bigger and bigger. It would not be long before Ryukyu Island became the base of the 6th young master. At this moment, Nha Tong's heart was filled with respect. Nha Tong, this time you transported so much military equipment, Rezken City wouldn't have been emptied out, right? Yang Chendong saw that because they had not been in contact with each other for a long time, Nha Tong was somewhat restrained, so he deliberately reduced this feeling of unfamiliarity through chatting. Being called by Yang Chendong, Nha Tong suddenly stood up from his chair. His action made the 2nd Marine Regiment Commander Luo Pu and Political Commissar Kong Jie also quickly stand up. Before, it was Yang Chendong who ordered them to sit, so they had no choice but to sit, but they also felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. Since Nha Tong stood up first, of course they would not continue to sit down. Hey, you guys should sit down. Seeing the 3 people all stand up, Yang Chendong smiled and pointed to the chair. 6th young master, let's stand. It's more comfortable this way. Luo Pu showed a somewhat dumbfounded expression, half pleading. Chapter 474. That's right, that's right. Kong Jie and Nie Tong agreed. Seeing that the three of them were of the same mind, Yang Chendong could not force them to do anything. He simply stood up and walked out of the awning. As he looked at the scene of the Han captives being sent to the ships, he said, Nie Tong, you still haven't answered my question. Replying to the sixth young master's question, these military resources will not affect the overall layout of Crimson City. We already knew that the army would expand, so the military factory has already been expanded twice. With the foundation we laid previously, there are many skilled craftsmen. In addition, through our own products, we are constantly exchanging steel and other materials from other countries and regions. Under the circumstances where we have enough raw materials, the production speed of firearms and ammunition has already doubled. For the time being, it is enough. Hearing Nie Tong speak about the situation of Crimson City, Yang Chendong was filled with emotions. Very good, but we need to have a sense of danger. We need to use our brains and take the initiative. Don't wait until we need to do something. This kind of passive waiting is not good. How about this? When you return, you must represent this young master to pay respect to those craftsmen working on the front lines. Also, tell Yu Qian to reward those who should be rewarded. Don't be stingy, and don't use the methods he used in Great Ming. If you can't give up the child, you can't trap the wolf. You need to look at the big picture and set your sights further. Yes, this subordinate will remember. Nie Tong nodded his head continuously. Since this was the sixth young master's intention, he naturally had to carry it out. He believed that even Yu Qian, who was in charge of Crimson City's administration, would not oppose this. Speaking of Yu Qian, when he first came to Crimson City, he had a very strong resistance. If not for the safety of his family, he would have thrown himself into the sea to commit suicide. But when he really had nothing to do and started to come into contact with this new city, the more he understood, the more attractive it became. After knowing that this was a government that worked for the welfare of the Han people, and after being enlightened by his family and friends, especially when he saw more and more people smiling brightly, he was finally tempted. Upon learning that Yu Qian intended to contribute, Yang Chendong, who was still in the Yang clan in the north, gave the order to hand over the administrative authority of Crimson City to Yu Qian, so that he could take a look. It was only administrative power, and did not involve the leadership of the military. No matter what ideas Yu Qian had, he would not be able to stir up any waves. In addition, Yang Chendong had personally given the order, so Yu Qian was appointed as the first city lord of Crimson City. Not long after he became the city lord, the originally chaotic Crimson City was put on the right track and became orderly. Many of the work became more orderly, which attracted the praise of everyone, including the military, who said that the ancients were pedantic. It was only because of their environment that they had no choice but to do certain things. Once they were given a new environment, they would still be able to do a lot of work. This was the formidable side of capable ministers. It was precisely because of Yu Qian and Crimson City that some of the original plans were quickly developed. Coupled with the full cooperation of everyone, Yang Chendong had the ability and strength to fight the war in Jiaoji. When it came to war, there were simply too many things to pay attention to. There were simply too many things that needed to be prepared, especially when it came to logistics. Since ancient times, there were people who said that war was actually a war of attrition. With sufficient logistical support and a natural advantage in firepower, Yang Chendong decided to make use of this opportunity to enter Jiaoji and exterminate them. That's right. Yang Chendong had never thought of compromising or taming after conquering. There were too many things he needed to do. It was just a small Jiaoji, and it wasn't worth his time. Back to the topic, Nie Tong saw that Yang Chendong seemed to be in a good mood. He thought for a while and made up his mind. Sixth young master, do you think that our navy can help in the war against Jiaoji? If it's really not possible, can we take down the Shang dynasty on Ryukyu Island? Actually, Nie Tong wanted to ask when they would attack Japan. But after thinking about it, with the current strength of Crimson City, even if they took down Japan, they would not have enough people to occupy it. Since that was the case, it was better to put it aside for now. There's no rush. The matter of the Shang dynasty can wait. Right now we should focus on building the foundation. Without enough people, it would be a waste to take it down now. As for the matter of fighting Jiaoji, your navy can help. How about this? After sending the people back to Crimson City, you can return and attack Jewel Island first. Then, you can take down Haifeng Town. In the future, it will be more convenient for us to lead the army. After that, you can use the advantage of the cannons on your ships to suppress Jiuzhen Prefecture and Renam Prefecture, forcing the Jiaoji people to not dare to make any moves. If necessary, you can send troops to land directly from the sea and cooperate with the army to occupy the entire Jiaoji. Hearing Yang Chendong's imposing words, Nietong also became very excited. Yes, please rest assured, sixth young master. After transporting these people back, I will lead my 2nd Marine Regiment to carry out your orders. We will also embark on the sea and attack the territory south of Jiaoji. Yang Chendong nodded. Nietong nodded. Nietong said excitedly, but he just wanted to participate in the war and contribute more merits. Yang Chendong, who understood this, completely laughed. There's no rush. Everything will depend on the progress of our army before we make a decision. In short, just wait for the news. When we need you all, don't drop the ball. In the previous life, when Yang Chendong was still called Yang Dong, the term drop the ball was often used in the army. Even after coming here, he could not change it. Because of this, when someone asked him what it meant, he would purposely explain it. The general idea was that at the crucial moment, one would lose one's true colors and not be able to perform well, resulting in failure. Nietong, who had also heard of the term drop the ball, immediately patted his chest and said with a tone of assurance, "Sixth young master, rest assured, our navy will definitely not drop the ball." Haha, that's good. Yang Chendong's hearty laughter rang out, echoing across the coastline of Xianan village. Yang Chendong had already escorted the 40,000 Han captives to Xianan village, completely shaking off their pursuers. However, Ruan Gongwang, who knew nothing about this, was still excited because he thought that he had captured the main force of the mercenaries. That's right, the scouts of the Jiaoji army were quite capable. Regardless of whether the clues were intentionally left behind or accidentally discovered, they had their eyes on a group of mercenaries, which was the 3 battalions Yang Chendong had purposely left behind to act as a distraction. The one in charge of leading the way and attracting the enemy's attention was the commander of the 3 battalions, Cold Front 1st Battalion Commander Wuxia. Accompanying him on this mission were 4 companies under his command and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. In total, there were 12 companies of 1,200 soldiers. A team of 1,200 people was not small, especially when they separated. Yang Chendong had purposely used most of the ammunition on them. With their strength, even if they were to face off against the 30,000 people led by Ruan Gongwang, they would still have the confidence to fight. However, Wu Xing did not do so. He knew what his mission was, which was to attract the attention of the Jiaoji army. As long as he could lure them out and successfully make them stay in the Langsun region, it would be a great achievement. In order to achieve this goal, he did not move very quickly and purposely left behind all sorts of clues. Even when he was cooking, he made many stoves, giving off the feeling that he was the main force. Ruan Gongwang, who did not understand the mercenaries at all, did not know. He had only seen the traces left behind by the enemy along the way, and thought that he had caught a big fish. Furthermore, the enemy had been constantly running and had not faced him head-on once. This created a misconception that after the 2 battles, the enemy had suffered heavy losses and should not have the ability to fight with him. Since there was such an opportunity to beat the enemy while they were down, how could he not grasp it? Not only did he lead 30,000 men to chase after the mercenaries, he also sent someone to report to the king, requesting them to send out troops as well. He wanted to eliminate the mercenaries who dared to intrude into the Langsun region. When the news reached the ears of King Li, he was naturally shocked. When the Great Ming dynasty was on the verge of falling apart, there was actually someone who dared to have designs on him. This was truly out of his expectations. Since there was someone who did not know life from death, he did not mind fulfilling their wishes. In fact, in order to show off his strength, he even sent out his general, Chen Heijin. The Chun family was the second largest family in Jiaoji. Chun Heijin was also one of the top figures in the Chun family. However, after he became famous, he completely sided with the Li family. This caused him to be known as Chun Haizi due to his ruthlessness. This time, when he found out that there were enemies who dared to enter the Lang Sun region, and with the king's orders, how could he be courteous? He immediately led his 30,000 elite troops, known as the Black Soldiers, to the north of Hanoi. Not only did he want to stop the mercenaries from entering Jiaoji, he also wanted to use this opportunity to wipe them all out. With just 3 battalions of soldiers, Wuxia was able to mobilize 60,000 soldiers. In addition to the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had died in battle, it was equivalent to holding back 80,000 soldiers. For Jiaoji, which only had around 300,000 soldiers, this was enough to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Since the tiger had been lured out, it was time to enter the tiger's den. After resting in Xianan village for 2 days and sending the 40,000 soldiers away, Yang Chendong brought his 20 battalions and 5 companies of soldiers to Chui City. Chapter 475. In order to avoid being discovered by others, especially when he knew that Jiaoji also had ships that were relatively small in comparison, he did not bring his army along the coastline. He even gave up on Hongji City and Haifeng City, which were easier to traverse, and went straight through the rainforest. Thanks to the specialized training they had received beforehand, and the fact that the soldiers were fully equipped, they were not afraid of the poisonous insects in the forest. Although the journey was a little tiring, there were no accidents. In just 3 days, they arrived at the forest 10 miles outside of Chui City. The scouts had already been sent out. All that was left was to wait for news. Yang Chendong ordered the army to rest on the spot. Other than using their own small pots to cook instant noodles, they were not allowed to light any open fires. After eating and drinking their fill, they were to sleep immediately to replenish their energy. Yang Chendong had already made a decision. They would launch a surprise attack tonight and take down Chui City. Now, all they had to do was wait for the reports from the scouts. Those who did well would be rewarded, and those who did wrong would be punished. This was the iron rule of the management of the cold front. During the battle in the rainforest, many soldiers had contributed greatly and were promoted. Scout Su Yinsheng was one of them. Due to his outstanding performance, especially when he hit Ruan Yongyang, Yang Chendong's plan could be carried out better. He was promoted from the position of squad leader to platoon leader. Don't underestimate this promotion, and don't underestimate the fact that it was just a platoon commander position. Once Su Yunxing entered the cold vanguard, he could easily be promoted to a company commander. On the other hand, if he entered the auxiliary troops, he could easily become a battalion commander. This was what it meant to be one rank higher. For example, if the soldiers in charge of protecting Yang Chendong in the 1st and 2nd Guards wanted to leave the company, they would at least be promoted to platoon leader. Once they displayed sufficient management skills, it was not impossible for them to be promoted to company commander, or even battalion commander. Su Yinsheng, who was promoted, was full of enthusiasm. This time he took the lead in infiltrating Chui City to investigate. Under his skillful command and the excellent performance of the scouts, the situation in the city was quickly dug out. They even dared to kidnap a lone centurion. Since they knew that everything was going well, they might launch a night attack on Chui City tonight. They just wanted to capture an insignificant centurion and make him disappear for a few hours. There shouldn't be any problems. It was from this captured centurion that they found out more about Chui City. They even drew a detailed map of the Jiaoji army's military strength distribution and sent it back to the scouts. Looking at the freshly drawn military topographic map in his hand, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be overjoyed. He exclaimed, "Good." There was a saying called "God bestows rice." It referred to certain people who were born to eat a bowl of rice in a certain industry. Su Yinsheng, for example, gave Yang Chendong the feeling that he was born to be a scout. Of course, this was not all due to the scouts. If the people from the Security Bureau had not infiltrated Chui City in advance and lived here for a period of time, They would not even have a safe place to stay in the city. How would they be able to carry out their work so smoothly? Yang Chendong's face was full of joy and even a little excited. When Hong Jin saw this, he felt a myriad of emotions. Hong Jin was a captive general. Although he really wanted to die a heroic death like Guan Yongyang, when he thought of the responsibility he bore and the fact that the Hong family had the upper hand at the last moment, he survived without any dignity. For a surrendered general like this, if it were any other opponent, they would first ask you some questions. Once they obtained what they wanted to know, you would be like a piece of bone without any flesh. That was the result of being abandoned. If the result was better, you might be able to barely survive. However, you could forget about your dignity. If the result was worse, it was normal to be killed after using up all your dignity. After all, you surrendered and were allowed to live for a few more days, which was considered to be doing you a favor. However, when it came to Hong Jin, it was completely different. Not only had he not been abandoned, he'd instead obtained a certain level of respect. It was even to the extent that Yang Chendong had promised him that he'd ensure the safety of his Hong clan. And if his performance was good, then Yang Chendong might even consider entrusting him with an important task. Being able to keep the family safe, although it was not wealth, already made Hong Jin very excited. Not to mention that there might be better opportunities to display his talents in the future. In the past few days he had been walking in the dense forest with the mercenaries. After witnessing their valiant marching speed and the powerful firearms in their hands countless times, Hong Jin smiled bitterly in his heart. When he thought about how he had thought of eliminating the mercenaries with the advantage of numbers, now it seemed that he really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. The strength of the mercenaries, especially their iron-like military discipline, and the sense of harmony between the soldiers, was something that Hong Jin had seen more than once. After the soldiers had gone to bed, Yang Chendong personally went to patrol the camp. He even saw him personally covering the soldiers with blankets that were kicked off by their feet. Hong Jin still remembered how shocked he was when he saw that scene. He had never thought of such a thing before. He had never seen any general in Jiaoji do such a thing. Most generals would indulge themselves in wine and women at night. Occasionally, there would be a few self-disciplined ones who would go to bed early. Who would think of the ordinary soldiers? It was no wonder that he could lead this mercenary army to become invincible. Just based on his heart and pressure, Hong Jin was far inferior to the generals he had met. For a moment, Hong Jin even had a thought. Could he seek refuge with Yang Chendong? He had a feeling that such a person would be able to achieve great things. If he could grab hold of him earlier, he might be able to make a name for himself. When he brought up this thought when he followed Yang Chendong, the sixth young master pondered for a moment before replying. It's good that you have the intention to seek refuge with us. However, it will be difficult for you to achieve the same status as the Han people. At most, you will only be a general in a second-rate army. No matter how hard you work, it will still be the same. Are you still willing? Yes. Hong Jin agreed without hesitation. He could tell that the sixth young master cared a lot about the Han people and the Ming people. In comparison, he would not treat the other races equally. However, it did not matter. If he could become a general in a second-rate army, it should be a very prestigious thing. At least he would be able to ensure the safety of the Hong family. Hong Jin revealed his intention to seek refuge. Naturally, he did not hide anything from the rest of the work. Through his words, Yang Chendong had a more detailed understanding of the situation in Jiaoji. It was as if his primary target was Chui City. It was also because he heard Hong Jin's words that he knew that the general guarding Chui City was an idiot. He was just relying on the fact that he had the most powerful bloodline of the Li family. He was used to abusing others. Because of this, the soldiers in the city lacked training and did not have any actual combat power. With such a weak enemy, Yang Chendong decided to choose this place as the breakthrough point. He would attack from here, and then throw a big stone into the clear water of Jiaoji to mess up the situation, and find a better opportunity to attack. His suggestion was accepted. This was an attitude of trust. Hong Jin was naturally overjoyed. He thought that he had made a contribution. However, when he saw the map of Chui City sent back by the scouts, he took a deep breath. At this moment, he knew that even if he did not say those words, the other party would still be able to understand the situation in the city clearly. For a moment, he had to keep a low profile. He no longer dared to consider himself as a meritorious person. After the map of the city was brought over, Yang Chendong immediately called for a meeting with the regiment commanders and battalion commanders. They began to distribute their respective tasks. Under Yang Chendong's military orders, in less than an hour, all the troops had received the tasks that they were supposed to do. Everyone knows what they are supposed to do, right? After distributing the tasks, Yang Chendong stood under the tree that was called the temporary headquarters and looked at the more than 20 regimental and battalion commanders surrounding him. Yes. With a low voice, all the commanders replied in unison. Very good. Yang Chendong also spoke in a suppressed voice. His voice did not need to be too loud as only the commanders could hear him. When you attack and occupy Chui City, you must remember that you can kill the soldiers and civilians who resist. As for those who surrender, there is no need to kill too much. What we lack the most now is people. Sixth young master. What if the commoners resist with all their might? A battalion commander of the auxiliary barracks asked. He had heard before that when the Great Ming dynasty attacked and occupied Jiaoji in the past, the entire population was a soldier. Sometimes even the children of the elderly would fight back with all their might. This caused the Great Ming army to suffer quite a bit. Didn't I say just now? As long as they resist, regardless of their identity, kill them. When Yang Chendong said this, he recalled the self-defense counterattack in his previous life. At that time, who knew how many lovely people had died in the hands of the elderly, women, and children? However, even so, he still forgave them in the spirit of humanitarianism. Yang Chendong would learn from the experience of his predecessors. If these people did not resist and obediently listened to him, it would be fine. However, if they wanted to resist and hurt his soldiers, then sorry, he would have to kill 100 of them. In any case, in this era, the spread of information was very slow. There was no need to worry about how others would criticize you. As for human rights, even the Great Ming dynasty divided people into different grades and ranks. What the hell is human rights? Chapter 476. Of course, he would only kill those who resisted. He would not kill those who surrendered. Firstly, he did not want Lung Feng to become a cold-blooded killing machine. Secondly, the current development required a large number of people. This hole would be filled by conquering Jiaoji. With Yang Chendong's reiteration, all the officers understood what they had to do next. They immediately turned around and made their preparations. Yang Chendong did not forget to tell Hong Jin, who was watching from the side. You are from Jiaoji. If possible, you can do more of everyone's work. I will arrange a squad of soldiers to protect you from harm. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. Hong Jin will do his best. Hong Jin replied respectfully. After all, he was just an external general. He did not even have the right to address Yang Chendong as the sixth young master. He could only address him as Duke of Loyalty to show his allegiance. The sky was getting darker. Lung Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers had already rested and were making their own preparations. The next thing they needed to do was to wait until the time was up before they began to attack the city. It was not accurate to say that they were attacking the city. This was because at midnight, when many people had already fallen asleep, the south gate of Chui City was opened from the inside. Then, a bright torch circled the city gate 3 times. This was the signal to enter the city. It meant that Su Yinsheng and the scouts had taken control of the city gate. The Yang family troops who were already prepared entered the city in an orderly manner. After they carefully entered the city gate, they were led by the scouts who were already prepared and rushed to their respective destinations. After entering the city, they went straight to their target. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Many people did not know that the army had entered the city. It was not until gunshots were heard from the granary, where the military supplies were stored, that the whole city became lively. Li Zhou was the general of Chui City who had the bloodline of the Li family. While he was still lying on the big warm bed with a beauty lying beside him, The door of the bedroom was suddenly pushed open from the outside. This movement instantly woke him up, and he shouted loudly, "Who is it?" "General, General, someone has broken into the city. Let's run." The ones who came were the guards of the general's mansion. To be able to become a general's bodyguard, they were naturally 1 in 100. Their vigilance had always been stronger than ordinary citizens and soldiers. When the city suddenly became chaotic, they felt that something was wrong. When they came out of the residence and came to the street, they vaguely saw an army approaching. They knew that it must be the enemy. After all, it was impossible for friendly forces to enter the city in the middle of the night without even saying hello. It was precisely because they knew that it might be the enemy that they rushed into the general's bedroom and shouted without regard for their status. Enemy? Where did the enemy come from? Wuxia, who was still not fully awake, asked in confusion. But just as he finished speaking, before the guards could even open their mouths to explain, a very crisp gunshot suddenly rang out from the courtyard. The moment the gunshot rang out, the few people in the bedroom instantly felt their hair stand on end. They did not expect the enemy to break into the residence so quickly. Wuxia, who was startled by the gunshot, was stunned for a moment. He did not ask any more questions and hurriedly put on the clothes he threw on the side of the bed. As he was putting on his clothes, he shouted, "What are you all standing there for? Hurry up and gather your men. Open up a bloody path for the general." Wuxia was still shouting when the sounds of killing and gunshots outside were getting closer and closer. Just as he finished putting on his clothes and did not forget to hang his sword on his body, the guards outside the house started wailing one after another. As the only general's residence in the city, it was naturally the focus of attention. The ones carrying out this mission were Chun Bo's troops from the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard. First, they completely surrounded the place. Then they broke down the door and entered the mansion. Once they entered, anyone who raised their weapons and refused to surrender, regardless of who they were, whether they were male or female, old or young, they were all shot to death. The 95 style continued to spew out tongues of fire in the night. Soon, the number of Jiaoji soldiers who fell under the muzzle of their guns increased to 100. Under the waves of gunshots, the people finally became obedient. They knew that the people who came were not joking with them. Some of the more courageous ones who were afraid of death threw their weapons to the ground and squatted on the ground obediently, becoming captives. After a series of gunshots outside the door, a few tall figures rushed into the bedroom and saw General Wuxia trembling all over. Wuxia was only promoted because of his family's connections. He had never fought a proper battle before. How could he have seen such a scene? Seeing the guard who reported the situation to him, just now lying in front of him covered in blood, his mind was completely blank. He did not know what to do. Remove his weapon. Although the Cold Vanguard did not know Wuxia and did not know what he looked like, they could tell that he was a big fish just by looking at his clothes. The squad leader who rushed in immediately grabbed Wuxia's sword and pressed him to the ground. Following the capture of Wuxia and the capture of the general's residence, the entire Chui city basically gave up all resistance. From the beginning to the end, it only took 3 hours to take control of the city. When Yang Chendong entered Chui city under the protection of the 1st and 2nd guards, the city had already been completely taken over. Other than the Yang family soldiers who were cleaning up the bloodstains and corpses on the streets, there was only one soldier who was standing guard 20 meters away. Lu Opa had also brought a group of officers to wait for Yang Chendong. When he saw the 6th young master coming over, he jogged forward to report the results of the battle. Reporting to the 6th young master, "The entire Chui city is already under our control. Right now, the 4 gates are tightly shut. Without orders, no one can leave. The general of Chui city, Wuxia, has also been captured alive by us, and is now being locked up in their residence. In this battle, we have killed approximately 1,300 people who resisted, and seized all kinds of military resources." Listening to Luopo's report, Yang Chendong nodded from time to time. After the other party finished, he said happily, "Very good, you have done well. Your military achievements will be recorded, and you will be rewarded according to your contributions." By the way, how are our casualties? Reporting to the sixth young master, we only injured a dozen temporary auxiliary soldiers. No one died in the battle. When he said this, Luopu was still very excited. Not bad. Hearing that there were no soldiers who died in the battle, Yang Chendong's face flashed with obvious satisfaction. Nowadays, the soldiers were more and more able to keep up with the rhythm of the war. During the battle in the forest of Langsun, more than 20 auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers were killed or injured. To be able to win this battle with 0 casualties was enough to make people feel gratified. Seeing that Yang Chendong was in a good mood, Political Commissar Kong Jie, who was standing at the side, hesitated for a moment before taking a small step forward to report. Sixth young master, we have found many Han people in the city. They are not living well. Many of them don't even have clothes to cover their bodies. What do you want to do with them? Yang Chendong's originally gratified and happy expression completely disappeared at this moment. He thought that the Han people in the outside world would not be living well, but it was out of his expectations that they could not even wear clothes. How many people are there? Yang Chendong's voice sounded in a low voice. We have roughly calculated, there are about 1,000 people. There should be some that we have not found yet. After all, this time, their main objective was to attack and occupy the city. They really did not have much time to observe other things. Where are they? Bring me to them. When Yang Chendong heard that there were so many people, and that not all of them were found, his frown deepened. According to Hong Jin and the information sent by the Security Bureau, Chui City was not very busy. Even the entire population of the city was only 20 to 30,000 people, and this was in addition to the 2,000 city guards. However, there were more than 1,000 people who were captured. Wouldn't that be 20 to 30% of the total population? It was definitely not a small number. Yang Chendong wanted to take a look at the captured Han people. Kong Jie originally wanted to stop him, but he thought that there were some things that should be seen clearly by the young master. This would be of great help to the sixth young master. He nodded and led the way. Under the protection of a group of Lung Feng, Yang Chendong turned 2 corners and arrived in front of a large courtyard. Looking at the courtyard, he knew that this was the place where the Han people gathered. Kong Jie was extremely meticulous with his arrangements. By placing the Han people here, he could prevent them from being harmed by the other Jiaoji people. When they arrived at the entrance of the courtyard, Political Commissar Kong Jie's footsteps were obviously heavy. He turned back and looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Sixth young master, you have to be mentally prepared." "Go in, I am ready." Yang Chendong's expression did not change. In his previous life, he had completed a mission in the war-torn lands of Africa. What kind of people had he not seen before? Although Yang Chendong thought that he had seen a lot, when he really entered the courtyard and saw the Han people sitting around the bonfire, his strong spirit was greatly shaken. What he saw could no longer be considered as humans. If he had to compare them, they were like apes that had not fully evolved. Yes, they were weak and skinny. They were as thin as firewood, and their eyes were wide open. They were looking at Yang Chendong and his group with fear. These people were generally not tall, and some of the adults were obviously hunched over. This was clearly the side effect of working hard for a long time, and their bodies could not bear the burden. There were also some old people who not only had dark skin, but their bodies were also extremely thin and weak. Looking at the small half of their arms that were exposed when they put on the unsuitable clothes that they had found from God knows where, they were probably not much thicker than a 6 or 7-year-old child. Chapter 477. There were also a small number of children. They were extremely thin and weak. At a glance, one could tell that they were malnourished and their body proportions were severely out of balance. There was also a young man who looked like he was 6 or 7 years old. He weighed less than 15 kilograms. His large head formed a stark contrast with his small body. If there was a video camera here, if this scene could be recorded and shown to the other Han people, the women would cry nonstop, and even the men would feel very uncomfortable. Just like the group of people standing beside Yang Chendong. Many of them had tears in their eyes. Some of them even had bloodshot eyes. They looked as if they were about to kill someone. These Jiaoji people deserve to be hacked to death. Tiger's mane was very close to Yang Chendong. Others might have considered the presence of the sixth young master, and would hesitate to say something. However, Tiger's mane did not need to. He directly said what was on his mind. With him taking the lead, the other people immediately followed suit. They were all cursing the Jiaoji people. Some even scolded the great Ming dynasty. These people were all kidnapped by the Jiaoji people. To think that they kept saying that the world was peaceful, and the people were rich. If that was the case, why didn't they save their own people? To let them suffer here. Was this something a great country would do? Yang Chendong was also in a bad mood. However, he knew that similar things did not only happen in Jiaoji, but also in other small countries. Not all Han people were respected, and not all Han people lived with dignity. It was just like the memories in his mind. The status of the Asians in the future was not high. They even felt inferior to the Asians. They felt that they could not compare to the Europeans. Even if the country was strong, this mentality was still in the hearts of many people. It was precisely because the country was not strong enough that it was impossible to talk about fairness in many things. Whether it was in the military, science and technology, or business and agriculture, this could be especially reflected. However, since he was blessed by the heavens and came to this world, and brought along the most powerful Tsang, Yang Chendong was determined to change this fate and situation. What he wanted was that no matter where he went in the future, as long as he said that he was a Han, people would look up to him. As long as he said that he was a Han, people would not have any thoughts of bullying him. On the contrary, they should be the ones feeling inferior. For this goal, Yang Chendong was willing to fight for the rest of his life, even if it was destined to be a long process. Give them enough food and clothing, then invite them to the largest square in the city tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong gritted his teeth as he finished speaking. Then he turned around and left. Clearly, he was unwilling to stay in such an environment for even a moment longer. It wasn't that he despised these poor Han people, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop himself from slaughtering all the Jiaoji people in the city. Behind him was a group of Lung Feng's higher-ups and guards. Compared to when they first arrived, their expressions were solemn and even frighteningly cold. A ruthless aura was naturally emitted from their bodies. Even after they left the courtyard and arrived at the main street, the auxiliary soldiers and temporary soldiers in charge of guarding the place could still clearly feel a monstrous killing intent. In the past, some of the officers of Lung Feng felt that it was inhumane for the sixth young master to want to exterminate Jiaoji. After all, the influence of the doctrine of the golden mean over the years wasn't ineffective. They were particular about harmony and wealth, about not leaving a line for others so that they could meet again. They were particular about being merciful and forgiving, and about winning people over with virtue. However, when they saw the scene of the Han people living in the city, their thoughts changed and were shaken. Since others didn't treat the Han people as humans, then don't blame the Han people for not treating you as humans. You brought this upon yourselves. Since you committed this sin, then you have to pay for it yourself. And such thoughts were constantly accumulating. Slowly, it would form a huge doubt that would eventually explode. The next morning, the meeting at the largest plaza in Chuyi City was the trigger point that Yang Chendong prepared for everyone. It wasn't enough for him to prosper the Han people alone. He needed the support and approval of more people. Although he could use his authority to force Lung Feng to do so, there was still a hint of coercion in the end. It wasn't something that everyone was willing to do. This would make it hard for things to be handled and carried out at a lower level. Yang Chendong hoped that he wasn't the only one who saw this point. Others would also see this point and willingly submit to him. That way he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Under Yang Chendong's orders, all the civilians and captured soldiers in Chuyi City were rushed to the plaza the next day. When they arrived, a temporary wooden platform had already been set up. In the center of the plaza, there were a few huge wooden pillars with people tied up. Any civilian who had lived in this city before could recognize that the person tied up in the middle of the wooden pillars was General Chu Yi. As a member of the Li family, Li had been tyrannical ever since he came to Chuyi City. Not only would he bully the Han people, He would also oppress the Jiaoji civilians as much as possible. This caused his reputation to be very bad. However, Wu asked him to be a member of the Li family. Most people were angry but didn't dare to say anything. So when they saw him tied up there, many people, including many Jiaoji civilians, were very happy. This was what they meant by, "Those who commit too much injustice will bring about their own destruction." If one day you separated yourself from the people, and always put yourself on a pedestal, then the day you fall would not be far away. The person tied up in the middle was Li Jia. On his two sides were his loyal subordinates and some black-hearted merchants in the city. It was precisely because of their protection that the common people's lives were so miserable and grievances could be heard everywhere. Because of this, even though there were more than 30,000 people in Jiaoji near the plaza, there wasn't much chaos. This made some of the officers who went to the courtyard last night feel like they couldn't vent their anger. More and more people gathered. Even some Jiaoji soldiers were brought here. Compared to the civilians, who were still relatively free, they were much more miserable. There were 20 people tied up on a rope. They were brought here with their bodies pressed against each other. It was as if they were wearing candied haws on a stick. Behave yourselves. Kill anyone who doesn't behave. The Lung Feng soldiers who were watching over them spoke with ferocious expressions, causing the Jiaoji soldiers who had witnessed their might to become extremely obedient. Even when they saw their general tied up on a wooden pillar, not a single one of them had any intention of stepping forward. Compared to the state of these captives, the treatment of the 2,000 Han commoners was much better. They could stand near the nearest wooden stake, and even eat the breakfast given by the army while gesturing with their fingers. They appeared to be very comfortable and relaxed. That's right. After the night, when the count of Han people started in the morning, there were a few hundred more people. There were a total of 2,000 Han people. These people spent the night in apprehension. Even though they knew that Sui City had changed hands and that it was very likely that the Ming army was coming, they didn't dare to take the initiative to step forward. After all, the Ming army was the Ming army, who said that they would definitely stand up for them. It was only this morning that more of the villagers found them and told them about how they had been treated the previous night. They had food, drinks, and even a good night's sleep. Only then did everyone start to believe them. More people started to come out. Now they gathered together and wanted to see what these Han soldiers who claimed that they weren't part of the Ming army were going to do. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Yang Chendong appeared on the platform under the protection of the guards. This uniform was custom-made by the clothing factory in Qiqian City. It was different from the one Yang Chendong wore during the military parade. This time it was golden in color. The golden threads sewn on it were all real, causing it to be several times heavier than normal clothes. Naturally, when it was worn, it shone with a golden light and looked very beautiful. In the eyes of the old men in Qiqian, the sixth young master was their sky, their king, and their emperor. Naturally, he was worthy of wearing such a uniform. Perhaps this was the thinking of the feudal society. Since he was the only emperor and king, he must wear gold to show it. If it wasn't for Yang Chendong's firm resistance, he was afraid that a golden dragon would be embroidered on the uniform. Thinking about it, this uniform was really no different from an emperor's robe. It could be seen how much these people hoped that Yang Chendong could become the emperor and lead them forward. Now this golden robe was empty on his body. After borrowing the style of the commander's uniform, it made the young man's heroic figure appear even more upright. When he appeared, his superior aura naturally manifested, causing the originally noisy square to immediately quiet down. This was exactly what Yang Chendong wanted to see. As he stretched his hand behind him, Beta Persei arrogantly brought out a loudspeaker that he had specially rushed out last night. This could play a better role in amplifying the sound. Holding the loudspeaker in his hand, Yang Chendong looked at the more than 40,000 soldiers in the square. He felt extremely excited and shouted majestically, "Long live Lung Feng! Long live the auxiliary soldiers! Long live the temporary auxiliary soldiers! Long live, long live, long live!" After a moment of silence, the sound of an earth-shattering echo echoed. Although shouting "Long live" here, there was no emperor appearing and it was a bit out of place, But it was undeniable that this shout stirred up the atmosphere of the more than 10,000 soldiers. Chapter 478. The excited shouts seemed to be contagious, causing many citizens of Jiaoji to have the urge to shout as well. This was human nature. Most of the time, things had nothing to do with them. However, when the people around them were doing the same, they would follow suit. There was no need to ask why, because there was no reason at all. After more than a dozen shouts, Yang Chendong once again placed the megaphone by his mouth. The crowd suddenly quieted down. It was so uniform that it created a huge psychological pressure. This kind of pressure was something that those who had never experienced personally would never be able to experience. Brave warriors, with your combined efforts, we have finally stepped into the Jiaoji nation today. Chuyi City is the first city that we have conquered, but it will definitely not be the last. It will not be long before we set foot on this entire nation and completely trample them under our feet. Long live, long live. As soon as his voice fell, tens of thousands of people shouted in unison, shaking the eardrums of everyone present. The megaphone was raised again, and the sound was suppressed. Then Yang Chendong looked at the crowd and began his speech for the day. The rise and fall of the nation is the responsibility of every man. In the long river of history, there are countless heroic deeds. Patriotic figures are shining like stars. During the Warring States period, there was the great patriotic poet Chu Yuan, the national hero Yu Fei, Wen Tianxiang, and so on. They were loyal to the motherland and loved the people. They were not afraid of demotion or sacrifice. They were loyal to the nation and loved the people. They were not afraid of demotion or sacrifice. However, today, I do not wish to talk about how glorious we were in the past, nor do I wish to talk about how great the ancients were. Because right in front of us are our fellow countrymen who have been victimized. Everyone, please take a look at them now. Do they have any pride as Han people? Could it be that when you look at them, you can feel the pride of being a soldier? As he spoke, Yang Chendong pointed at the 2,000 Han people in front of him. Most of them had already put on new clothes with the help of Lung Feng. At the very least, they could cover their skin and prevent it from being exposed. But those clothes were obviously new, and they didn't fit her at all. Moreover, even if she was wearing clothes, it still couldn't prevent everyone from seeing her thin body underneath. Their emaciated faces were telling everyone that they were not doing well at all. Just as everyone was looking at the 2,000 Hans with their own thoughts, Yang Chendong's voice sounded out once more. No, this is our disgrace. Every day, we proclaim that the world is peaceful and prosperous, but we can't even guarantee the safety and lives of our own people. How can the grand great Ming dynasty have the face to say that? If I must say, they are not fit for the job. They are unqualified. They took the taxes that the people worked hard to pay for nothing. They let the people place their hopes on them for nothing. They became rulers for nothing. They are incompetent. If they can't even protect their own people, how can they talk about peace and prosperity? How can they talk about being a great country? How can they talk about caring for the world? What's even more hateful is that every time a country comes to the capital to pay respects to the emperor, they still have the face to take out large amounts of gold and silver and give them back. They even say that they are friends for generations, and that this is the style of a great country. If we let them see the situation of our own people outside, I wonder if they will feel ashamed? Perhaps not. However, we cannot place our hopes on them anymore. Since they are sitting in their high positions and not doing anything, then let's get out of the way and let those who are willing to do the work. And we are the people who are willing to do the work. At the very least, with our hard work, we will be able to let more of our own people live better and more dignified lives. At the very least, with our hard work, we will not be bullied or treated unfairly by others. At the very least, with our hard work, the Han people will become the true rulers of the world. Any kind people who want to be on good terms with the Han people will also be able to live a good life. When Yang Chendong spoke up to this point, he had already revealed his ambition. It was as if he did not put the great Ming dynasty in his eyes. However, the Yang family soldiers did not feel that there was anything wrong. In their opinion, no one was stronger than their sixth young master. Since that was the case, it would be best for the sixth young master to lead them. As for those who objected, they would have to experience the power of the guns in their hands. Even if you were made of iron, you would still be blasted into a sieve. Yang Qindong's speech continued. When he talked about personal dignity, he pointed at the Lung Feng brothers who were maintaining order and said, "They are the greatest army. What others can't do, they can do. What others can't think of, they can think of. In the future, with them around, we the Han people will become the strongest and most unique people in the world. No matter where we go, we will be respected by others. All the things that others have forced on us in the past, we will take it back 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Today we will start with the enemies in Chu-Yi City who are hostile to the Han people. Men, bring down the daggers." Under Yang Qindong's shout, a company of 100 Lung Feng soldiers each carried a plate out. On each plate, there was a dagger. There were a total of 1,000 daggers. This was the gift that Yang Qindong had prepared for the Han people. Didn't the ancients say that those who were evil to the core deserved to be stabbed 1,000 times? Well then, today was the real version. After the daggers were taken down, Yang Qindong looked at the 2,000 Han people with an encouraging gaze. "Next, we will read out the crimes. After you are convicted, you can take revenge. There are 1,000 daggers here. 1,000 of you can take them and cut the bodies of those who have bullied you in the past. Believe me, no one will convict you. Your actions are completely legal and reasonable. However, do you dare to do so?" At the end of his speech, Yang Qindong's tone had become a kind of questioning, but more importantly, he was still guiding them. After being questioned by Yang Qindong, the 2,000 Han people who originally thought that they were here to watch the show were at a loss for words. These people were used to being bullied and treated like humans. Some of them were even born like this. Ever since they could understand things, there was a thought that told them that they were the most lowly people and deserved to be bullied like cattle or horses. Now that there was a possibility that this might change, of course, they would feel uncomfortable. The 2,000 people looked at each other. The children looked at the adults, and the adults looked at the elderly. No one made a decision immediately. "What? You don't even have the courage to take revenge on your enemies?" Yang Qindong had long expected this scene. After all, many years of habits were not something that could be easily changed. However, when he saw that these people were still so hesitant despite his support, he was somewhat disappointed. Yang Qindong was disappointed. Because of this, there was a sense of loss in his eyes. This scene was seen by the 2,000 people. Although they had only known each other for a short time, at most, it was only the second time that they had met. However, they could truly feel that this seemingly powerful young man was biased towards them. Everything that he did was for their own good. Since he was doing it for their own good, they could not let such a good person down. With this thought in mind, 2 middle-aged men in the crowd finally responded. However, because of the years of oppression, they were still a little timid. Even when they responded to Yang Qindong, their voices were not very loud. If the 6th young master had not been staring at these people, he would not have been able to hear what they were saying. "We dare." "You what?" Seeing that someone finally took the initiative to step forward, Yang Qindong stared at the 2 men with encouraging eyes. As if infected by Yang Qindong's emotions, the 2 men first looked at each other, and then their tone became firmer. "We dare to take these daggers to take revenge on our enemies." "Good. Beta Persei, send the daggers to the 2 of them." Yang Qindong immediately agreed, and Beta Persei quickly took 2 daggers and sent them to the 2 men. When the 2 of them really held a dagger in their trembling hands, this scene deeply stimulated the others behind them. Immediately the men and women who also said they dared to step forward. It was only 1,000 daggers, and they were quickly distributed. Some of the children wanted to have a dagger, but it was already gone. This was because Yang Qindong considered that they were still young, and did not want to do it personally. He did not want to leave any bad memories in their hearts. Therefore, he only took out 1,000 daggers. With these 1,000 daggers and the protection of the strong Lung Feng, These Han people who had been bullied for many years finally had the courage to rush to the wooden platform and cut Lijia's body with their daggers. Instead of stabbing, they cut. This was to end Lijia's life by 1,000 cuts. It had to be said that this method was a bit cruel. This could be distinguished from his wailing and howling. But at the same time, it was also a way to vent their hatred. This could be seen from the faces of the people who waved their daggers. Not only did they vent their anger, but they also took the opportunity to hold their heads high. Their courage seemed to have increased a lot at this moment, and confidence shrouded them. Chapter 479. In the following period of time, Lija was not the only one who enjoyed such treatment. The other influential people in Chui City, who were tied up with him, also enjoyed the treatment. Their status and identity were mostly obtained by oppressing the Han people. Now it was time for them to reap the benefits. The screams on the small platform became louder and louder, causing the people of Jiaoji who were forced to watch the execution to feel their scalps go numb. Because of this, there was some chaos. Some people even wanted to take the opportunity to resist and instigate others to attack the mercenaries. Since they were already prepared, the sharpshooters of the cold front quickly found the troublemakers. The sound of the 95 style was heard from afar. After killing dozens of leaders, the chaotic scene was completely suppressed. After seeing the soldiers shoot and kill without any explanation, everyone became more obedient for the sake of their own lives. Although they became obedient, it did not mean that they would be let off. As the next step was carried out, under the testimony of the Han people, the people of Jiaoji who had bullied them were pulled out from the crowd one by one. Then, they would be put on public trial based on the mistakes they had made. Those who were too vicious were beheaded on the spot. Those who did not commit too serious of a crime were sentenced to a term of imprisonment and would be brought to Qiqian City in the future. As more and more people from Jiaoji were brought out, some of the other people were regretting it while some were rejoicing. Those who regretted it were those who had mistreated the Han people. They were thinking that if they had been kind back then, they would not have to be punished so severely now. It seemed that it was better to be kind to others. Fortunately, there were kind-hearted lords who treated the Han people well. Now they did not have to worry about being accused by others. All they had to do was to live their lives well. The series of activities of testifying, arresting, public trial, and sentencing lasted from morning to night. However, it was still not completed. According to Yang Qindong, such a public trial would take another day. This was because there were not many people in Chui City. If there were more people, it would take 7 days and 7 nights to finish the trial, just like in Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji. The public trial would continue tomorrow, and it was necessary to eliminate the unstable elements in the city once and for all. At the same time, it was necessary to build up the confidence of the 2,000 Han people. After all, for a period of time, there were some matters that required their help to complete. However, these were no longer important. Under the suppression of the armed forces, the citizens of Jiaoji in the city could no longer cause any trouble. What Yang Qindong needed to consider was what Jiaoji would do after he conquered Chui City, and how he should deal with it. Fortunately, the communication system was not advanced. Even if something happened in the city, it would not spread immediately. In other words, Yang Qindong and his men still had time to make all the necessary preparations. After summoning the officers under him, Yang Qindong began to make arrangements in an orderly manner. After an hour, the officers walked out of the barracks. Some of them had satisfied smiles on their faces, just like Chen Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front. There were also some officers who looked dejected. It was obvious that their unit was not the main attacker. If they were not the main attacker, they would not be able to make great contributions. It was no wonder that their expressions were ugly. The one with the ugliest expression was King Lily of Jiaoji, who had just received the news. On the afternoon of the 2nd day after Chui City was conquered, old Lily, who was in his 60s and taking an afternoon nap with his concubine, was woken up by his subordinates. While he was still looking displeased, as if he would punish his subordinates for disturbing him if it wasn't something important, A piece of news made him turn pale with fright. Your Majesty, there is news from the rear. Chui City has been conquered by the mercenaries. Lily, who was not fully awake yet, widened his eyes when he heard this. Then, he acted as if he did not hear it clearly and asked, "What did you say? Say it again." Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing of Jiaoji knew that it was not that the king did not hear it clearly, but that he did not want to believe it. He had no choice but to repeat the incident of Chui City being conquered. This time, Lily heard it clearly. His brain was working at high speed, and his eyeballs were moving in fear. After a while he asked, "Have you found out who did it?" "Your Majesty, we have not found out. However, I think it has a lot to do with the mercenaries," Yuan Chunqing guessed. Mercenaries? Weren't they surrounded by Ruan Gengwang and Chen Heijin? Where did they find the troops to attack Chui City? Lily shook his head as he spoke. Obviously, he did not believe that the mercenaries were so powerful. Therefore he added, "Could it be the Southern Ming army? After all, they thought that we killed their envoy. It is normal for them to seek revenge." "Absolutely not." At this moment, Yuan Chunqing said confidently. Then he explained, "Your Majesty, we have arranged our own people in the Southern Ming army. If they do anything, they will not be able to hide it from our eyes. Moreover, the Southern Ming's opponent is the king of Minzhuang. Before this disaster is dealt with, how could they divide their troops to deal with us?" Lily nodded after hearing Yuan Chunqing's words. He knew that he still looked down on the mercenaries. If that was the case, it seemed that only this mysterious army could make a move on them. However, no matter how mysterious he was still a human. Lily strode to the map of the palace and stood there for a moment before he gave the order. Order Jishu, Beibei, and Longbian cities to send troops to attack Chui City from different directions. Try to get rid of the invading mercenaries in the city in the shortest time possible. Also, send someone to contact Chen Heijin and Ruan Gengwang. Tell them that we have discovered the main force of the mercenaries here. Tell them to advance boldly and get rid of the enemy as soon as possible." Lily might be old, but he still had a thorough understanding of the situation in Jiaoji. The series of countermeasures he adopted were also very appropriate. Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing, who was standing below, nodded. If he was the one making the arrangements, this was the most he could do. He immediately complied and walked out of the room. When King Lily was the only one left, his eyes flashed with anger and killing intent. "Mercenaries, since you took the initiative to find trouble with me, then don't go back." Jiaoji was not very big. The advantage of a small country was that things could be spread quickly. As scouts on horses left the city and headed in different directions, a net was formed to deal with the mercenaries. Beibei City. It was located on the east side of Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji. It could be said that it was the eastern gate of the capital. Since it was the eastern gate, its location was naturally very important. To be able to become the general guarding the city, he naturally had some authority. He was Pan Wenfei of the Pan family, one of the 6 great families of Jiaoji. Relying on his family's prestige, Pan Wenfei obtained this position. Because of this matter, who knew how many people had talked about him behind his back? He did not know when it started, but he had secretly made up his mind to perform well. When he achieved great merit, he would use facts to slap the faces of those who dared to slander him behind his back. He would let them know that they were wrong. However, many times having the intention was one thing, and being able to do it was another. If he wanted to achieve great merit, he had to have the opportunity. Previously, when King Lily was persuaded to send troops to the Southern Ming Empire, Pan Wenfei had fought to bring troops north. However, how could the Pan family compete with the Ruan family? In the end he failed. After returning to Beibei City, he could only continue to wait. However, although Beibei City was known as the eastern gate of Hanoi, the Southern Ming Empire was currently weak. It seemed that it was impossible for them to attack Jiaoji's territory. He did not know where his opportunity was, and if it would appear again. This was especially so when he received news that Ruan Gengwang's army was progressing smoothly, and he had already captured 50,000 Han soldiers. This made his heart itch even more. and he cursed Yuan Gengwang countless times in his heart, jealous of his good luck. Fortunately, some time ago, news suddenly came from the front, saying that an army called the Mercenary Army had suddenly appeared and fought with Yuan Gengwang. Yuan Gengwang's nephew, Yuan Yongyang, had died on the battlefield. When he received the news, Pan Wenfei's heart was filled with joy. Although they were officials of the same court, there was still a difference in seniority. If Yuan Gengwang could not do it, would it be his turn? It was also from that time that he began to train the army, preparing to replace Yuan Gengwang and go to the front lines at any time. However, what he did not expect was that before Yuan Gengwang's news came, Chui City to his east had suddenly changed hands. When this news came out, it gave him a big fright. After sending people to pass the news to Hanoi City, Pan Wenfei began to prepare to send troops. Speaking of which, Chui City was the closest to him. Now that he had the opportunity to send troops, no one would fight with him. Didn't that mean that it was time for him to display his strength? As long as he eliminated the enemy from the east, he would definitely attract the attention of the king. In the future, it would not be difficult for him to get promoted and become rich. The more he thought about it, the more excited Pan Wenfei became. In a very short time, he began to gather the troops and mobilize the military supplies. He could not wait to perform well. Sure enough, in less than a day, King Li Li's order was passed down, allowing North Belt City to send troops to Chui City. At the same time, they would take back Chui City and eliminate the invading enemies. Chapter 480. Who was the enemy? The imperial edict did not state it clearly. However, to Pan Wenfei, none of this was important. What was important was that he could finally lead an army into battle. He had envied his elders for being able to gallop on the battlefield countless times. The moment he received the order, he gathered the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were on standby and left the city. It was not that Pan Wenfei did not want to bring more soldiers out of the city, but he could only mobilize these 2,000 men. With the mentality of going all out in battle, not a single soldier was left in the city. All of them followed him out of the city and headed straight for Chui City in the east. At the same time when Pan Wenfei left the city, the armies of Jishu and Longdian cities also began to gather rapidly and set off towards Chui City 6 hours later. The only difference was that they only brought 1,000 soldiers and left half of their soldiers to guard the city. The 3 northern cities moved, and the scouts who had been staring at them quickly reported the information to Chui City's Yang Chendong. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Yang Chendong, who was facing the 3 armies, was not afraid at all. On the contrary, he laughed out loud. Very good, especially the North Belt City General Pan Wenfei's performance. It seems like you are quite accurate in judging people, Hong Jin. Yang Chendong laughed out loud. Hong Jin, who was standing respectfully at the side, lowered his head and replied embarrassedly, I was just lucky to have guessed correctly. It is still the Duke of Loyal and Courageous who gained from strategizing. Previously, Yang Chendong had listened to Hong Jin's analysis of the characters of some of the Jiaoji generals. When he talked about Pan Wenfei, he said that this person was a person who rejoiced in grandiose achievements. He always liked to talk about strategy on paper when he had nothing to do. Because of this, many people had laughed at him. He had never been on the battlefield and thought that he could win the war by manipulating the map. What was the difference between this and deceiving oneself? However, Pan Wenfei only thought that others laughed at him out of jealousy and did not listen to advice at all. As one of the generals, Hong Jin naturally knew about this matter. He reported the matter and proposed that once he learned that Cord City was easily occupied, Pan Wenfei would play his armchair strategist. It was very likely that he would mobilize the entire army and reveal a great flaw. Yang Chendong attached great importance to Hong Jin's words. Furthermore, in his opinion, it was fine even if the information was inaccurate. To be honest, he didn't think much of the 1,200 Jiaoji soldiers. Sending out a cold front battalion, or even an auxiliary battalion to deal with them would be a piece of cake. With such confidence, Yang Chendong followed Xian Hongjin's plan, and arranged for Battalion Commander Chen Bo of Lungfeng to lie in ambush on the road between Beidao City and Chui City. He was only waiting for the enemy to come out in full force, so that he could seize the opportunity to seize the city. Now it seemed that this arrangement was very correct. After praising Hong Jin, Yang Chendong turned to the other officers and said, "Since the enemy has made their move, we should also prepare for action. Follow plan number 1, and enter the battlefield." Yes. After the officers saluted in unison, they began to get busy with their own tasks. At this moment, King Lily of Jiaoji had no idea what kind of powerful opponent they were facing this time. Even the enemy had started to move. The Jiaoji army that had been peaceful for over 20 years was now in a state of turmoil and war. The distance between Beidao City and Chuyi City was only about 180 li. Even if the road was uneven and they had to take a detour, it was only about 200 li. In Pan Wenfei's opinion, this distance could be covered in 3 days. In terms of leg strength, the Ming army was more than twice as fast as the Jiaoji army. Perhaps it was because they had lived in the mountains since young. Many of them had trained their feet to be as sturdy as iron. Even if they were only wearing cloth shoes, their walking speed was still not slow. They could cover about 70 li in a day. In addition, the weather was perfect. It was still drizzling a while ago, but in the past 2 days, the weather had completely cleared up. The weather was so good, the roads were drier, and the army moved faster and faster. All of this created an illusion for Pan Wenfei that this was the will of the heavens, allowing him to reach Chuyi City faster and achieve the first military victory. The speed of Beifeng's army was already very fast. However, compared to the 2 battalions led by Battalion Commander Chen Bo and the 2 auxiliary battalions, it was still much slower. Once there was no battle, the Lung Feng's usual training was 10 kilometers in the morning and 10 kilometers in the morning. If the weather was good in the afternoon, they would even do a 5 kilometers warm-up. Under such high-intensity training, no one could compare to him in terms of speed. To the Lungfeng, it was normal for them to cover a distance of 100 kilometers in a day. If the situation was urgent, they could move even faster. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. They did not understand the mercenaries at all. They did not even dare to confirm whether the ones who took down Chuyi City were mercenaries. The fate of the Jiaoji army seemed to have been decided. Needless to say, Beidi City had already been taken down by Yang Chendong. How could their defeat not be decided? Just like now, when the sky darkened, Chen Bo led his 3 battalions of Yang family army to quietly pass by the other side of the mountain range. This kind of irregular movement left Pan Wenfei completely in the dark. He didn't know that his old nest, Beidai City, was about to face the consequence of changing its surname, and he was destined to become a lone army, an army that would never return. In Chuyi City, Yang Chendong was having dinner with 2,000 Han people. The trial conference had ended yesterday. Those who had mistreated the Han people in Chuyi City in the past, regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, had all received their due retribution. This left Chuyi City, which originally had a population of 30,000, with only 25,000 people left. A total of 2,000 people were killed and 3,000 were sentenced to death. The entire city was filled with the smell of blood. Even the number of Jiaoji citizens walking on the streets had decreased significantly. Even though the number of people had decreased, the atmosphere in the city had become better. The evil people had all been killed, leaving only the kind-hearted ones. When they met, they would nod their heads to show their friendliness, which lessened the killing intent. In particular, the Yang clan army had never bullied anyone. As long as one abided by the law, even if one bumped into them on the streets, they would not interfere with one another. This made the remaining 20,000 Jiaoji citizens feel much more at ease. In addition, Yang Chendong had ordered the Yang clan army to open up the treasury of Chuyi City and distribute the stored food to the citizens on time. This solved the problem of their food supply, and the atmosphere in the city became much more harmonious. Speaking of which, Jiaoji used to be a subordinate of the Great Ming Dynasty, so the citizens did not have a strong sense of conflict. In addition, Yang Chendong had the intention of running this place well. In just 2 days, the security in the city had improved. Setting himself as an example, Yang Chendong would come to eat with the Han people whenever it was time to eat. Under the influence of the good atmosphere, not only did the Han people feel warm, even some of the more daring citizens of Jiaoji dared to come over and take a look at the young demon king who had killed people without batting an eyelid 2 days ago. Tonight, Yang Chendong came to the square to eat with the Han people again, deepening the relationship between both parties. In fact, since yesterday, there were no more than 2,000 Han people gathered here. Under the busy work of Kong Jie and Song Zhe, the two political commissars, the houses of the Jiaoji villains who had been killed were vacated for the Han people to live in and use. This allowed more Han people to be allocated their own houses. It was said that once the situation stabilized, the city gates could be opened to the outside world, and land would be distributed to everyone. This gave all the Han people hope. Since ancient times, land was the foundation of the people. As long as they had land, they could grow food, obtain a good harvest, and live on. It was precisely because Yang Chendong was considerate of them and gave them dignity that the Han people liked this young master. Even though many of them had already been allocated their own houses, when it was time to eat, they would still rush to the square to eat and chat with the young master who brought them hope. Facing these people, Yang Chendong did not put on any airs. Instead, he squatted down and ate with everyone. After eating, he sat cross-legged on the ground and chatted with everyone. As for the content of the chat, there was a variety of topics. Since he did not put on any airs and was so amiable, it allowed him to quickly get closer to the people. Following that, when Yang Chendong talked about some matters and policies, he would receive a positive response from the people. After 2 days of interaction, the Han people also knew that this young master was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty. It seemed that he had a lot to say. After some of the bolder ones finished eating, they asked tentatively, "Duke, you guys have taken down Chui. Presumably, that old fellow Li Li will not accept it. Will they take revenge here?" Just from the way they addressed him, it could be seen how much the Han people living in Jiaoji hated Li Li. Of course, this was also because they had their own dignity after interacting with Yang Chendong and the others for a few days. If it was in the past, they would definitely not dare to say such words. Yes. When this issue was raised, many people's faces changed. It was not easy to have their own dignity and hope for the future. They did not want everything to disappear so quickly. Seeing that everyone was so worried, Yang Chendong smiled. He knew that it was time to reassure everyone. Didn't you all say that Li Li is an old man? Since he is already old, how can he be our opponent? Moreover, it's not like you haven't seen how powerful our army is. Other than the fact that we have fewer people now, our combat power is very strong. Don't worry, unless the enemy doesn't come, no matter how many come, we will destroy them all. When the war starts, if you are interested, you can go up the city tower and see for yourself. Other people might be in danger guarding the city, but we don't have to. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.